Again, it just tells the story of it's the evil and the ugliness of people's hearts these days is everywhere.
This is Frankie Rose's Think Tank. Here's your host, Frankie Rose.
Hey guys, welcome back to the Think Tank. So we took a brief break to see John Ray give an update on what he has as far as Rex Heuermann's family goes. You might be surprised. There's a lot of talk about the daughter. So after this, make sure you go back and check that out because it will blow your mind. I tell you what. Sorry. So, okay, let's get on with this. So, I might have gone a little bit ahead, but I don't think too much. And we have Jackson up. So, let's do this.
A red plastic taillight piece that was recovered first. Then 3 feet or so to the south of that, the shoe was recovered. And then 1 to 2 feet south of that, another red plastic piece, and then a clear plastic piece next to that, correct?
Yeah, you get the last two inverted. It's clear, then red. But
Inversion, it's becoming a theme. Sorry about that. So it's a clear piece.
So I'm going to strike that comment.
Clear piece, and then a red piece next to the clear piece.
yes,
3 pieces of plastic in total and a shoe.
no. There was with the clear piece. There was 2 pieces with it. So clear plastic, multiple pieces of the clear plastic.
Okay, so yesterday when we saw the photographs that you testified to, there was 1 piece of clear plastic that was photographed, right?
2.
Didn't the photograph have 1 sort of arc-shaped clear piece of plastic that you described as having the stippling?
Yes, I believe. I think I said dimples.
Okay. What was the second photo?
There's the next photo that was displayed was the second piece of clear plastic taillight.
So in fact, that would be 4 pieces of plastic.
Yes,
Okay. But yesterday you testified that you found 3 pieces of plastic, and in your report, you reported that you found 3 pieces of plastic, correct?
I didn't number the piece of plastic if I recall my report correctly. I said we found clear plastic, and as I displayed out of the bag, there was 2 pieces of clear plastic that we.
But there was only a photograph of 1.
No, there wasn't.
And your report says 3 total pieces of plastic, doesn't it?
No.
Let's take a look.
Do you have your report with you, Detective Lieutenant?
Not that one, Your Honor.
Okay.
I may have just a moment, Your Honor.
Sure.
Oh, I don't know if you're talking about this case or what we just watched, the feud arising. Oh my word. Good job, Johnny Ray and his team. That has my brain spinning what we just watched, you guys.
Can I have those photographs from yesterday?
We can hear you, Bev.
Your Honor, is it possible that we can take our recess so I don't waste the jurors' time? I can use my time wisely.
Sure.
All right, jurors, we'll take our morning recess.
Okay, morning recess. We don't have to wait. We don't have to wait. Oh, no. There we go. Boom. Oh,
Sure,
damn.
right ahead.
Lieutenant Tully, we were talking just before the break about the search on January 29th, 2022. Obviously, it's important to be accurate in terms of the memorialization of things that are found of note during a search, correct?
Yes,
And the way that you normally would memorialize something like that would be in a police report, correct?
that's one method,
You
yes.
might have personal handwritten notes
I
that
might.
would attend a search, correct?
Yes,
You might videotape part of it or all of it,
I could,
and then you could photo document it as well.
yes.
But ultimately, the circumstances surrounding how something was found or what was found at the time is best done in a memorialization in a police report, correct?
That is one method,
And
yes.
that is the official record of what was done at the time and who did it, correct?
Yes,
And you did in fact draft a police report as it pertains to the search that was done by the search team on January 29th, 2022.
yes.
Mayor Pro Tem?
Yes.
Oh, Bev, yes. Yes. Oh,
If you would take a look at the face page of that and tell me if that looks familiar to you.
It does.
Is that your report that you utilized? Is that the report that you wrote, rather not utilized? Is that the report that you wrote documenting the search that was conducted that you've testified to in front of this jury?
Yes.
What's the date of that report?
February 10th, 2021, which was a typo, should be February 2022.
Okay, so February 10th, 2022 was the date that you memorialized the information about the search, correct?
Yes,
Obviously, that was much, much closer in time than today, correct?
yes,
Or yesterday, correct?
correct.
If you turn to paragraph 3, could you review that paragraph and tell me, after you review it, if that refreshes your recollection about exactly what you indicated was found by you and the CERT team on January 29th, 2022?
My recollection of what was located remains the same. I do see that the report states that it was a piece of clear plastic.
Okay, so in fact, your report says that at approximately 17:45 hours, which is what time?
5:45 p.m.
The CERT team located, quote, a piece of red plastic, correct?
Yes,
And then it goes on to say it was consistent with brake-like material from a motor vehicle, right?
yes,
Then if you look down a couple of other sentences, you talk about the shoe that was then recovered, correct?
yes,
Then if you look at the second to the last sentence, a few feet south from the sneaker, a piece of clear plastic consistent with clear lens of a motor vehicle was located, correct?
yeah, the quote is a second piece of red plastic. Yes,
Well, actually, the sentence before that, it's just above that, starting with a few feet south.
yes,
It reads, a few feet south from the sneaker, a piece of clear plastic.
that's not what it says. Would you like me to read it?
Oh, I'm reading it. Sure, read it.
Okay. The sentence is several feet south of the clear plastic,
Lieutenant Tully.
Sorry.
Sentence above that, before that.
a few feet south of the sneaker, a piece of clear plastic consistent with clear lens of a motor vehicle was located.
Right. So in your lexicon, a piece means singular, does it not?
Yes,
If you meant pieces, you would have written pieces. You're educated, correct?
allegedly.
So clearly, from this report that was memorialized on February 10th, you indicated that a piece of clear plastic was located consistent with clear lens from a motor vehicle, right?
That's what it says.
Okay. Then, well, it's not just what it says, it's what you wrote.
Correct.
Right. Then the next sentence, which is the sentence you were about to read, go ahead and read that for me as well.
Several feet south of the clear plastic, a second piece of red plastic was located.
Okay. Simple math. According to your report on February 10th, a piece of red plastic was found first. Then a piece of clear plastic was found. Then a piece of red plastic was found thereafter, correct? According to that report.
Yes,
Then you go on in the following paragraph to reiterate, just to clear up any doubt about what was found. And the last sentence reads, the sneaker and 3 pieces of plastic were secured as evidence, correct?
Objection.
See, overruled, I don't know. What's the objection?
Form.
No, I'll allow it.
Is that what it says?
Yes.
Okay. Then yesterday, you were asked to open these two evidence envelopes, correct? The evidence bags.
Could I take a look?
Oh, of course, yes. May I approach you?
Yes.
Sorry. 570, 571. Those are the bags that you opened yesterday, correct?
Yes.
You indicated yesterday in front of the jury, you didn't indicate, you pulled out 2 pieces of clear plastic, did you not?
I did.
Night,
That was in
Bingo.
bag,
Thank
I
you
wanna
for
say
your
that
help.
was in bag 570.
Thank
Why
you,
don't we do
thank you.
this? Can you please open, with the court's permission, can you please open bag 570? I'm sorry, evidence, exhibit 570 in that bag, and just look inside.
I didn't bring gloves with me, Your Honor.
I
Is
think
there-
there might be some on the stand
Oh,
there
thank you, Your
inside
Honor.
that.
Attorney Jackson, could you just repeat your request again, make sure I have it correct?
Of course, Lieutenant. Let's start with 570.
Okay.
I don't remember which one it is, so if you could just open it and look inside and describe for us which items are inside that bag.
So 570, the description is pieces of red, hard plastic taillight cover contained inside this bag.
Look down in there and tell me, do you see red plastic pieces?
Yes.
Okay. Yesterday, you pulled out 2 pieces and indicated that was what was contained in the bag, correct?
Correct.
Take another closer look.
As I take a closer look, there are 2 pieces and there is a very small fragment that remains in the bag.
Can you pull that fragment out as well? Can you show that to the jury? Okay, you can go ahead and replace that. So in total, Lieutenant Tully, how many pieces of red plastic are in that evidence bag?
As we sit here today, there are 3.
Thank you. Go ahead and close that. And we can open up the second bag. I'll go ahead with the court's permission. May I approach?
Yes.
Thank you.
Yes, Jesus. Jesus.
Your Honor, may I?
Yes.
If you wouldn't mind, the next bag is exhibit 571, is that right?
Yes.
Could you please open that and let's go through the same process? Just look inside and tell us what you see.
Inside 571, there are 2 pieces of clear plastic.
You can go ahead and replace those. Thank you, Lieutenant. Those 2 bags are supposed to represent what was found by the CERT team on January 29th, 2022, correct?
Yes.
There's 5 pieces of plastic, 3 red, 2 clear, correct?
As we sit here today, yes.
Yeah, show us that shoe
My
again.
question, Lieutenant Tully, is
The
where do the
clean
other
one.
pieces of plastic come from?
Be more specific? Which pieces?
Where did the extra 2 pieces of plastic come from in those evidence bags?
Well, it appears to me that small fragment I pulled out may have potentially come from the larger piece. The
I
other,
think that, just to clear that up, you believe, as you sit here, that smaller piece is broken off from one of the larger pieces?
again, I'm making a big assumption here at your request.
Okay?
So yeah, that's what it appears to me by looking in the bag.
And by the way, Lieutenant, this isn't a trick question. I'm not asking you to assume anything. You were there and you recovered the pieces. And you described recovering 3 items of evidence, correct?
No.
Didn't you just read in your report? I'll read it again, last sentence. The sneaker and 3 pieces of plastic were secured as evidence.
That's
You wrote
4.
that.
That's 4.
Sorry, I said items of evidence, items of plastic. Let's leave the sneaker out of our discussion for the time being.
Okay.
Okay. You were the one that conducted the search, correct?
The CERT team conducted the search. I was
You
present.
memorialized the search.
Yes,
You were there photographing the things that were covered in the search,
yes,
and ultimately you were responsible for bagging those items up, correct?
yes,
There are 5 items in that bag, or in those 2 bags, right? Just the plastic.
correct.
And yet your report very clearly says there were 3 items of plastic evidence recovered at the scene, correct?
Yes.
So my question, once again, is where did the extra 2 items come from? The pieces of plastic.
Well, as memorialized on the bag, it says pieces of clear plastic. So I'll take the hit that my report does not properly memorialize it. But I would argue that the handwritten notes on the bag that are contemporaneous to the collection of the evidence would be.
Okay. I had a glitch.
We did an evidence review with you, yourself, and other defense counsel on December 1st of last year. We pulled all the evidence out. It was memorialized by your investigator, and it was put back in the bags.
You didn't see our investigator snapping pieces off the plastic, right?
He did not.
I want to shift gears for a second, Lieutenant, and talk a little bit about the cell records that you testified to. Specifically the Verizon call records that you testified about during your training, the 200 plus hours of training that you had. You've learned how to read Verizon records to determine cell towers that are used in your investigation, correct?
Yes,
You were also taught how to read Verizon call records to determine the sector or the side that a cell tower is pinging, for lack of a better word, called a cell face, correct?
yes.
All right. One of the May I approach? No?
Yes.
Thank you. May I, Lieutenant? One of the documents that you rely on pretty heavily is ultimately it's a call record that gives you certain information provided by the whoever the carrier is, Verizon, AT&T, T-Mobile, whoever, right?
Yes.
Do you recognize the document that's in front of you or the portion of the call record that's in front of you?
It appears to be a portion from the call detail records we referenced earlier.
Okay. My questions about this are relatively simple. There is a sector number that provides information that describes the directionality, if you will, of the target phone number, which part of the cell tower that target phone number or that target device was facing, correct?
Yes.
In your maps, did you include any of the cell face data about which portion of the cell tower was pinging vis-a-vis the phone that was being tracked?
No. Can I explain why I made that decision?
Please do.
When the trouble with depicting and making exhibits when relative to cell phone records is you don't want to make the map too complicated. So as I describe it to the jury, I want to make sure that the record is clear. Now, I don't typically will use the sector as part of my maps. I would argue that it gives greater deference to the defendant because the phone could be anywhere within a 360-degree area of the antenna opposed to a narrower 120-degree area around that antenna. So for the purposes of making a clear depiction, I typically will not use sector unless it's absolutely important to show that a handset was in a specific location.
And so you did use, I'm sorry, you did not include the sector information on the maps that you provided, both to Mr. Lally and that you showed to the jurors, provided us, correct?
Yes, as relative to the CSLI ones, yes.
So in point of fact, according to the map at least, wherever that little triangle is, that red triangle that you used to denote the cell tower or the antenna, the responsive phone, the device, would be anywhere on a 360-degree azimuth from that antenna, correct?
Yes.
I want to ask you about the one map that was related to 5:20 a.m. to 5:37 a.m. You remember that?
Not off the top of my head.
Okay. There were several maps shown.
Word salad is right.
Can I approach?
Yes.
She just likes that, doesn't she? I am the head bird.
That's a copy of a page of an exhibit that's already been marked and entered into evidence. You recognize that?
Yes.
And that's a copy of your map that you did dealing with ENBID 57021, correct?
Yes.
And the time frame was 5:20 a.m. to 5:37 a.m. Is that right?
Yes.
All right. And by the way, do you know what ENBID stands for?
No, that's why the legend key is helpful. Its node is the NB, but I'm unsure on the E.
Evolved Node B Identifier, right?
Is that a question? Yeah, that's possible. Yes.
It is my question.
Okay.
Refresh your recollection. That's what it means.
I'd have to look at the key again, but that sounds right.
So an evolved, if that's what it stands for, an evolved Node B Identifier, and then a series of numbers after that is simply sort of the proper name for a particular tower.
Correct.
No two towers have the same ENBID, correct?
Correct.
Okay. With regard to, and I'm just going to call it ID 57021, do you see what appears to be, on your map, what appears to be the cell tower that is associated with that ID number, 57021?
Yes.
Okay. And there's one address that's denoted on your map, correct? Is that 34 Fairview?
No, there's multiple.
Okay. What are the other addresses that you noted on your map?
One Meadows Ave and Waterfall Bar and Grill.
Okay. May I approach you on that?
Yes.
If I could hand you another map, does that appear to be a Google map?
Yes.
Does that generally track the map that you created, the darker map that you created? Meaning it's the same basic scale?
It is not the same scale.
How much different is that scale?
The one you handed me is a zoomed in version of the map I created.
Okay. You recognize it as being a true and accurate reflection of a Google map that's just zoomed in a little bit on the same basic area?
As you just described, it appears to be Google Map
Okay.
creation.
And you see two addresses that are denoted on that Google map?
Yes.
What are those two addresses?
34 Fairview Road and 12 Country Lane.
And as you look at that Google map with both of those, given your experience with both of those addresses, do those appear to be denoted accurately on that Google map?
It does. I would note that you can't see the roads really on this map that you handed me.
Understood. I'm not going to ask you a question about
It's
the
kind of it's a white blur, so it.
Okay. But does it look like that's where
Jesus.
34 Fairview is and that's where 12 Country Lane?
Yeah.
Okay. Then I'm going to ask you for the third.
God
item
almighty,
noted
here
on
we
that,
go.
That is the cell tower 57021. You see that denoted on the map?
Yes.
Does that appear to be generally accurate in terms of the spatial location of where that cell tower is?
Yes.
Move for the admission of that item, that document.
So this guy's equally as
Objection.
difficult with the defense. What? Come on, you were doing good.
Thank you.
And now it's like pulling teeth again. I don't know. I can't see it. I don't know. I don't know. I object. Can I
Thank you.
object?
Taking a look at that exhibit,
Oh my
would you agree that the cell tower 57021 is significantly closer to what's denoted as 12 Country Lane, the McCabe residence, physically as a crow flies, than it is to 34 Fairview?
I would not characterize it as significant,
How would you characterize it?
that it is closer.
Okay. May I publish, John?
Okay.
That's all he wanted. Yeah, it's right, Dandy. Like, why? It makes them look bad, in my opinion.
Just a second. Take a look at the upper portion, upper right portion of the map that I just highlighted. What does that denote?
The cell tower that we previously mentioned, 57021.
Okay. And then there's a line it's a straight line from that cell tower down to this location. What is that location?
It's denoted on this exhibit as 34 Fairview Road.
Okay. And do you see a legend indicating scale? How far that is?
I see numbers and miles written on there.
Does that appear to be reflective of given your understanding and your experience with this location or these locations, does that appear to be a relatively accurate delineation of the distance between the cell tower and that location, and that address?
I don't know the distance between the cell tower and the address off the top of my head.
It's showing you. Look.
Would you agree that it's around 2 miles?
It's roughly 2 miles.
Okay. Then I'm going to ask you to take a look at the same proximity, cell tower on the top
Oh
of
my
the
God.
screen, and then the address at 12 Country Lane. Do you see those two items denoted on the map?
Yes.
And do you see the approximate distance between those two items?
See it on the map?
All right. And does it appear to you that the distance from 12 Country Lane looks like it's less than half the distance to 34 Fairview?
I wouldn't characterize it as it appears to be less than half.
How would you characterize it?
My understanding of that area, I would say it's at least a mile between those two locations as the crow flies.
Okay, meaning between the cell tower and 12 Country Lane,
Yeah,
right?
Yes.
And it indicates approximately a mile, correct?
it does indicate that.
Okay. And the other location indicates approximately 2.4 miles, right?
It does indicate that.
All right. So would you agree that a mile is less than half of 2.4 miles?
I would agree a mile is less than half than 2.4.
Thank you. We can take that down.
Good God, really? Well, there goes
You also
my
noted
belief that you're
there were two cell
objective.
towers much closer to 34. There are two cell towers much closer to 34 Fairview than the 57021, correct?
Yes,
And as a matter of fact, you already noted that for the jurors that say at 6 a.m. or 6:05 a.m. and thereafter, when it's clear that Ms. Reed was at 34 Fairview, she found the body of John O'Keefe, that her phone was relaying to those two towers, bouncing back and forth, correct?
yes,
Those two towers are 57171, correct? Sorry, I don't
What?
need to test your memory like that. I can. Can I approach?
Yes.
This is just his grand jury stuff, the same stuff as usual. I'm just going to give you that packet, Lieutenant. Like I said, it's not a memory test. That helps refresh your recollection of the name of the two towers closest to 34 Fairview. Do you have that in mind?
yes, sir.
Okay, so the two towers closest to 34 Fairview are 57171, correct?
Yes,
And 57286, is that right?
yes,
And both of those towers picked up Miss Reed's signal at 12:33 a.m. and again after 6:03 a.m., correct?
You asked me about 12:33, so if it's okay, I'm going to refer back in the exhibit,
Of course.
and that is correct. It hit the 57171.
And then after 6 a.m., it was also picking up, bouncing, I think you said bouncing back and forth between 57171 and 57286.
Yes,
Both of those towers were picking her up.
yes.
Importantly, though, between 5:20 and 5:37 a.m., neither of those two towers ever picked up her phone or any signal from her phone, correct?
Correct.
So based on those facts, it's far more likely that Karen Reed was actually at Jennifer McCabe's and on her way to Jennifer McCabe's at and around 5 a.m. than going to 34th, correct?
Objection.
Sustained.
May I approach this to retrieve?
Sure.
I just want to make sure I didn't leave the mark.
Oh, I'm sorry. That goes with that, I believe. Oh, you handed me that. Here's the marked item.
Perfect. Make sure that stays there.
There were two other documents you had handed me previously that are not marked.
Okay. Thank you, Rod. I just want to touch very briefly on the ranging data, the RTT records. What does RTT stand for?
Depends on who you ask from Verizon, either range to tower or round trip time.
Have you ever heard real-time tool?
I have.
Okay, so that's the RTT has several acronyms, but real-time tool is one of them, correct?
Yes.
The RTT data is what you earlier described as a ranging data or access distance, correct?
I didn't use the term access distance. I know that Verizon may, but I said ranging.
So it's just in common vernacular, it's the distance from the tower or from the antenna to where the signal is going, correct?
Yes.
All right. May I approach one more time?
Yes.
Could you please review that and tell me if you recognize what's depicted on that document?
I recognize it to be one of the entries from the RTT report for the account we're talking about.
I'm sorry. And it's around 5:18 in the morning, correct?
Yes,
Okay. And you utilize this report or portions of this report, including this entry, to come up with your data, especially as it relates to ranging data, correct?
yes.
Do you see the column on that document called cross duration sex, right? Procedure duration sex.
I do.
What does that mean?
That is the amount of time in which this communication occurred.
Okay. Am I correct in understanding that the length of time for the RTT event is calculated in seconds, correct?
It is.
All right. Do you see the row in the exhibit that indicates the time 5:18 a.m.?
Yes,
And do you see a column that's labeled procedure start time?
yes,
And right next to it, there's a procedure end time, correct?
yes,
Are those the start times and the end times that you earlier testified to in front of the jury about the event in question at 5:18 a.m. or thereabouts, the start of the interaction or the communication with the device and the end of the communication with the device?
yes.
When you say communication with the device, what does that mean? What are you referring to?
It's,
A phone call, a text, something?
we don't know. As I testified to, the ranging reports will create entries even unbeknownst to the user. So I have no information with this record before me about what the user was or was not doing with the phone.
But your testimony is that those two arcs that we saw, those respective arcs that we saw, your testimony is that this RTT data, in your view, establishes that she was on the device, not she, but the device was on the first arc at the start time, and it was on the second arc at the end time.
I'm going off the ranging that they give me.
And then you created those two arcs. I'm just trying to make sure I understand what the definition of those two arcs are in your map.
The definition comes from the first distance and last distance, which is denoted on this exhibit you have in front of me here.
Okay, and the first distance is what?
0.82 miles.
Okay, and the second distance is, from memory, I think it's 0.97?
Correct.
That's a difference of what? We do the math.
1.5 miles.
0.15 miles, correct?
Excuse me, yes.
Okay. And do you see the procedural duration column indicated on that document?
I do.
Okay. And the procedure duration column indicates 0, doesn't it?
Yes.
However, if we look very closely at the start time and the end time, they're not actually the same times, are they?
Correct.
There's a difference in those two times. Can you tell the jurors what that difference is?
It is 4 thousandths of a second.
0.004 seconds, correct?
Yes.
And you testified that you believe that the start and end distances for the RTT event in question indicate 2 different locations for that device. In other words, the start time, it was on the first arc. The end time, it was on the second arc. You don't know where on the arc, but somewhere on those 2 arcs.
Using the ranging data, I created a map,
I
and
understand.
that's what I did.
Okay, and so the device would have moved from the first arc to the second arc, correct?
Yes.
Right. You're familiar with, obviously, the formula to determine speed using distance and time, correct?
Yes.
All right. Can you calculate for us the speed that the device would have traveled to go from the first arc to the second arc over a distance of 0.15 miles in 4 thousandths of a second?
Not off the top of my head.
Okay. Let me see if I can help. So speed is calculated as distance divided by time, right?
Yes.
If you divide 0.15 miles by 4 thousandths of a second, you come up with 37.5 miles per second. Would you agree?
Objection.
Sustained.
Can you do the calculation in your head?
No, sir.
Do you need a calculator?
I would.
Your Honor, if
I'd like to see counsel at sidebar, please.
Of course. Of course, Bev. Whatever you want. Come on, come on, come on. Okay. Hey, James. Good to see ya. Sidebar. What is going on? What the hell? Okay, I am looking around, trying to get a couple other things done while they're side buying.
Unmuted.
Senator Tully, do you happen to have your cell phone with you?
I thought you were going to ask the other question first with your numbers.
I can. Let me ask you, so you don't have to sit there with a cell phone in front of you. Let me ask you if you would agree with this, that 0.15 divided by 0.004 is 37.5.
I'd have to write it out. I'm not sure. I'm sorry.
If you had a calculator in front of you, could you do it?
I could.
You don't have your cell phone with you.
I do not.
With the court's permission, I've got mine right here. I can turn it on, or my co-counsel has.
How about, can you use Madam Court Reporter's cell phone and do that? She's closest.
Yes, Your Honor.
Thank you.
To save time,
Thank you,
Bill.
Madam Court Reporter.
Thank you, Your Honor. If you could divide 0.15 by 0.004.
Why am I having problems here?
Let me know what you come up with.
37.5.
So that would be, given the fact that the distance as calculated, as indicated on that record, the distance is 0.15 miles over the course of 0.004 seconds, right?
No, I would push back as to when the distance was being created. That's the first distance and last distance.
Correct. What you indicated was the cell phone or the device was on the first arc during the first time, and the start time, and on the second arc at the end time. All I'm asking is some basic math. So you would agree that if the calculation we just did, or you just did, is 0.15 miles divided by 4 thousandths of a second, that is 37.5 miles per second to stay consistent. Miles per second, correct?
Well, I don't agree with the premise of the question. So
You don't have to agree with the premise of the question. I'm asking you about the math.
Oh, the math is correct. Yes.
The math is correct. Right? It's miles per second, correct?
Yes.
Based on that calculation. In order to get to miles per minute, you multiply it by 60, correct?
Yes,
Can you do that for me, please?
Madam Clerk. The question again, sir, I'm sorry.
Yes. Multiplying 37.5 times 60 would give us miles per minute. What is that number?
2,250.
And if we wanted to go to miles per hour, which we're more familiar with, multiply it by 60 again, wouldn't you? And what's that number?
1,035,000. Excuse me, sorry. 135,000.
135,000 miles per hour, correct?
Yes,
So you would agree if the premise is moving from the arc, the first arc, moving 0.15 miles to the second arc over the course of 0.004 seconds, the device would have to be traveling 135,000 miles per hour, correct?
in your question, you said 1.5 miles travel. It's 0.15 miles. You corrected me. I'm going to throw it back at you, sir.
Fair enough, fair enough.
All right.
Touche. 0.15 miles over the course of 0.004 seconds, the device would have to be traveling 135,000 miles per hour. It's basic math, correct?
While I agree with that, I would push back. That's probably not what the record is indicating.
You would agree that that is physically impossible, correct?
For cell phone, yes.
Right. And you would also agree that since that's impossible, you're not suggesting to this jury that the device moved from arc 1 to arc 2 in 4 thousandths of a second. That can't be what you're suggesting.
I'm not suggesting that.
Okay. In fact, what actually makes more sense is that the signal was moving to and from the device at light speed, 186,000 miles per second.
It does. Radio
waves move it at what?
speed of light.
Speed of light, 186,000 miles per second, right?
Yes.
Okay. If, as you indicated on direct examination, if that return signal, the bounce, is in any way refracted, meaning it takes a deviation, and it's not straight because of something like, I don't know, weather, precipitation, or snow, then it would take longer to get back to the intent, correct?
That's fair.
And that could be what's reflected in that map and the distance of the two arcs. Isn't that correct?
That's not my experience with these records.
But you do agree that in fact the device, as you indicated earlier, moved from arc 1 to arc 2 from the start time to the end time. That's impossible.
No, I'm saying that the records reflect that the first time the distance was created, marked, and the second time the distance was marked, that's what's represented on the map.
Right, but you said that those are reflective of the start time and the end time, which is 4 thousandths of a second apart.
No, I don't know that's when these distances were created. It doesn't say start of procedure distance. It says first distance, last distance.
Actually, it says, see if I got the copy of what I just gave you. I don't. May I approach?
Yes.
Procedure start time, 5:18 and 19 seconds, 0.154, right?
Yes.
Procedure end time, 5:18, 19 seconds, 0.158, right?
Yes.
That's the difference. May I approach one more time?
Yes.
That's the difference And that's the 0.004 of a second difference, correct?
Yes,
And on direct examination, you said the start time and the end time are how you calculated the two different arcs,
No.
correct?
No.
Are you changing your testimony?
no, the map says first and last, as reflected in the record, first distance and last distance. So one could hold the map and this record next to each other and figure out how I determined those locations depicted on the map. It doesn't say start and end time. It says first and last.
Right. But you said that it was the beginning of the communication and the end of the communication, which are both reflected on that document, Lieutenant. The
Yes.
start time and the end time. I understand what you're saying about the distance. It's 0.15. Nobody's arguing about that. You're saying, you said on direct examination that the distance was a difference between what time the first arc occurred and what time the second arc occurred. And there was a distance between it. And your testimony was the device moved from the first arc to the second arc. You just said it, right?
I'm saying the device moved from the first arc to the second arc, yes.
And it would be impossible to do that in 0.004, correct?
A cell phone, yes.
You did one last issue, and I'm gonna deviate from the cell tower stuff. You got information during the course of your investigation that an eyewitness placed a Ford Edge in front of 34 Fairview in the early morning hours of January 29, 2022, correct?
I'm familiar with that.
As the supervising investigator, by the way, you were familiar with the fact that the eyewitness placed that Ford Edge sorry, see if I can start that over. The eyewitness indicated that the Ford Edge was placed there sometime between 2:30 in the morning and 3:30 in the morning, correct?
I'm familiar with that.
All right. As the supervising investigator, did you do anything to investigate the circumstances of that Ford Edge being placed in front of 34 Fairview sometime between 2:30 and 3:30 in the morning?
Yes.
What did you do?
Well, we determined the veracity of that statement, and we want to make sure that the person who gave it is consistent and accurate and had a good vantage point of it. I have concerns about.
By the way,
Oh.
were you satisfied with that?
No.
Why not?
Well, the person has given the statement multiple times, and it appears to have changed over those times. It also appears that the person observed this vehicle from a distance, and also the identification of a Ford Edge seemed highly suggestive the way that I had read the account of it. If I had done that as a police officer, this court would throw out that identification.
So, did you find out anybody in the Albert family, for instance, on the Ford Edge?
I don't recall off the top of my head if somebody,
Did you look at automobile registration records?
I did not know.
Did you task anybody else to look at automobile registration records?
I believe Trooper Proctor and Sergeant Mechanic had investigated that.
And do you have any idea what that investigation revealed?
I don't.
Did the Alberts own a Ford Edge?
I don't know as I sit here.
They did own a Ford Edge, didn't they?
Objection.
So the objection sustained.
But nothing was done further that you're aware of to investigate the circumstances of that Ford Edge being seen and placed in front of 34 Fairview, right where the body was found, between 2:30 and 3:30 in the morning, right?
An investigation into the reliability of that witness was conducted.
So you just decided, and that investigation, quotes, is, I didn't believe him, right?
No.
We have more, yes. That's all I have.
Okay, Mr. Lally, anything?
Just briefly.
So as far as that last line of questioning, as far as the witness in the Ford Edge, you mentioned that there were several different stories, correct?
Yes.
Several different versions of the statement.
Yes.
And what were those different versions?
The first was that this person saw a Ford Edge in front of 34 Fairview. The next one that I can recall is that the person stated that they were not on Fairview, but on Cedar Crest, some distance away, looking at this vehicle in a blizzard. Person also self-reported that he was colorblind, and he was operating a larger motor vehicle. The third story was a concern about the time. The third story was, as he arrived, the Canton police had the street blocked off at about 4 a.m. and he places this Ford Edge outside the residence at a time before that. So we know through our investigation that the Canton police didn't arrive till shortly after 6 a.m. So the witnesses' times are off as well.
As far as the, what you termed as a highly suggestive ID with the Ford Edge, can you explain what you mean by that?
As I read the report, the investigator had asked the person, first a question. They stated that there was a vehicle in front of 34 Fairview Road. The witness was then brought outside, and the investigator allegedly pointed to a motor vehicle that was in a parking lot, and it said, "Is that it?" And the witness said, "Yes, that's it." And so it's suggestive in the fact that it would be a single photo identification, which, you know, as a police officer, I would not give somebody one thing and be suggestive, "Is this it?" Because as the courts have ruled, that's highly suggestive, and the person's more likely to adopt that description of whatever they're describing, opposed to if you use other methods.
Now, when you were being asked on cross-examination about certain distances from the house at 34 Fairview to the area where you had recovered items, repeatedly you had been asked about a distance of 30 feet, correct?
I did.
From the items that you recovered and the area that was described to you as where Mr. O'Keefe's body was located shortly after 6 a.m., is that 30 feet from the house?
No, where the items were a little further on the edge of the property, so it'd be closer to 40 or 50 feet.
And as far as where Mr. O'Keefe was located with reference to the curb, with reference to the street, how close was that?
From the curb, reports was about 10 feet from the curb.
And so the evidence was a lot closer to the roadway, a lot closer to the curb than it was to the house, correct?
Objection.
Sustained as to form.
As far as what, if anything, did you find significant between the location of the evidence in relation to and Mr. O'Keefe in relation to the roadway versus in relation to the house?
The pieces of evidence were physically on the roadway, on the pavement, or the curb.
Just one question as it applies to the Sally Court video from the Canton Police Department. Are you aware of sort of how those videos were recorded as far as when they stopped, when they started?
Not off the top of my head, no. But the ones we have in possession, no.
As far as, and I'm sorry, let me ask the question probably a little more succinctly, but with reference to, are you familiar at all with the camera system at the Canton Police Station?
Vaguely, yes.
As far as, do you know whether or not it's motion activated?
The Canton IT director stated that it was.
So the objection is sustained.
So let me ask it with, are you aware that the cameras are motion activated?
Objection.
As to form, it's sustained.
What, if anything, are you aware as to how the cameras record?
Objection.
I'm going to allow it.
New approach.
Okay.
You are muted.
You are muted. Make it fast. I sent you a message, Den D. Come on. I can zoom through this too. We don't gotta.
Are you aware that the cameras are motion activated?
Objection.
As to form, it's sustained.
What, if anything, are you aware as to how the cameras record?
Objection.
I'm going to allow it.
New approach.
Okay.
You are muted.
No problem. Some good news in there. Okay. Looks like it's going to be fairly fast. But Come on, no, we're waiting. Good question. Who flipped the timestamp, Lally?
You are
I agree.
unmuted.
I agree.
Now, Lieutenant, when it came to the Sally Port video, at some point you did review them to some extent.
Yes.
Now, over the course of your review, what, if anything, did you note in reference to time? Was it sort of one long consistent, or did it jump?
It jumped.
And based on that, what, if any, conclusions did you draw as to how that video recorded?
It appeared to be motion activated. As these jumps occurred, it appeared to be triggered by motion.
Now, with reference to the items that were recovered on January 29th during the search team search that you were present for, in addition to your police report, how, if at all, were they memorialized?
On the exterior of the paper bags that they were contained in.
And when was that done? Before or after February 10th, when your report was written?
Objection.
Ask it differently.
When was the memorialization on the evidence bags done in relation to when you wrote the report?
Objection.
I'll allow it.
The difference would be the notes on the outside of the bag happened at the time of collection, and then I wrote my report 11 days later.
So, as far as your memory, as you sit here and testify today and yesterday, as far as the items that you took out of the bag, are those the same items that you recovered, or were recovered by the search team on January 29th?
Yes.
Now, the information from the call detail records that Mr. Jackson presented to you, there was essentially two little columns, correct?
2 rows, yes.
Rows, excuse me. And was that sort of the entirety of what you reviewed as far as the call detail records in relation to generating the slides that would depict to the jury?
No.
And sorry, may I approach him?
Yes.
May I see the exhibit? Sorry,
These are not marked.
the mark.
Which one?
Whatever the last one was, Mr. Yes, thank you. May I approach the witness, John?
Yes.
Oh, Lordy.
Showing you now what's been marked as Exhibit 577 with reference to what Mr. Jackson had given you earlier. Lieutenant, from what's depicted on there, what, if any, issue do you have with the depiction on that exhibit?
Like I mentioned, it's difficult to get a good sense of what we're looking at because the roads don't really appear on here. If they do, they're light and faint.
Okay, buddy. Doesn't just tell
There are the large black line kind of intersects with a lot of them,
me.
with the words of them. At the bottom, it looks like it's written map scale next to a scale, but I can't attest to the veracity of that. Those would be a couple problems I see.
Now, with reference to the slides that you created,
James.
the different time frames, not just the one single time frame. Again, the times that you observed or the location of the handset, of the cell phone of the defendants that you observed from the call detail records, were they consistent with other pieces of evidence that you had, whether it be video and or witness statements?
Yes.
And that would be consistent with the location of the defendant, correct?
Yes.
We need this guy to go
Now-
up the stand.
We're asked some questions about speed and distance traveled. And you indicated that you did not agree with the premise of Mr. Jackson's question, correct?
Yes.
Can you explain to the jury what it was about the premise or what it was that you did not agree?
So while I agree it would be impossible for the phone to travel at that distance, I disagree with the premise that the procedure that it was being captured here and the distances may not be at the same time. So there may be the distance could have preceded the procedure and the end distance could have been after the procedure. There are other ways to capture that information. Again, all I'm doing, and I'm at the mercy of the records, is illustrating them. I then take the next step in order to corroborate that information, ideally through video and other location-based information.
Now, in relation to speed, is that something that you've done in other cases with call detail records?
Yes.
And you mentioned that you weren't able to do it here or didn't do it here. Can you explain why not?
By speed, do you mean route of travel or? So if I have a more robust set of records, so again, we're at the mercy of Verizon here. We only got a limited number of records from the ranging data. With other cases, if the phone is much more chatty with the antenna, if there's more lines of communication, I've seen lines of communication as frequent as every couple of seconds or less than a couple of seconds. As I map those out, I can make more of a determination of maybe the route of travel of the cell phone. So as I put the first arc, I'll then place the second arc on a map and say to myself, how could a handset get from the first arc to the second arc? And I'll have a number of possibilities. I will then lay out the third arc. Okay, how could a phone get from the second arc to the third arc, and repeat that process, narrowing down the different possibilities. And oftentimes I'm able to determine the route of travel, send investigators down to that route, and we find corroborating information.
Oh, there you
And
go.
again, why was it that you weren't able to do that with this information that you received from Verizon in this case?
We received a limited number of entries on this record.
And what, if any, relationship does that have to sort of the area or the geographic location as far as the town of Canton is concerned and the number of antennas?
Oh my.
Well, as respective to the number of records, it's a larger area the cell phone could potentially be.
So in no way in your testimony, in your slides or anything else, are you suggesting that the device or the handset or the defendant's cell phone was traveling at that speed, correct?
Correct.
So could you explain to the jury again exactly what those arcs mean and what you are explaining with reference to?
Those records have a start distance and an end distance. I take those distances, place them on a map, starting where the antenna, there's also in that record, states it is. Draw a distance from that antenna, draw an arc at that distance with the radius being the distance that's on the record, and have an arc that's in excess of 120 degrees.
You also asked some questions about whether causing some sort of interference or something in relation to the reporting with regard to antennas or which antenna a device might connect to. You indicated that was not your experience with these types of records. Can you expound upon that?
The greatest predictor of what antenna a cell phone is going to use is distance, because like I said, the farther the handset is away from an antenna, the more degraded the signal is going to get. So that's the best predictor. But like I mentioned earlier, there are things that can disrupt a cell phone signal, which would cause a handset not to connect to the closest antenna. And that can be physical obstruction, precipitation, elevation, an antenna goes down for whatever period or for whatever reason, causing it to connect to another antenna that is technically further away.
And so from your review of the call detail records and from your mapping from those various time frames contained within the slides we'll send to the jury, what, if anything, can you say from that material in reference to the other evidence collected as to the location of the defendant's cell phone during those relevant time periods?
Well, relevant, I'll zero in at 518. I would suggest that the defendant, her vehicle, and the cell phone were on Washington Street outside of Temple Beth Abraham at that time. That's one thing that I would be comfortable suggesting.
Can I have a moment, Trump?
Yes.
Yeah, he's brain numbing. And yeah, I know that's the thing. Lolly just gets the best witnesses, right?
Thanks, sir. Nothing further, Your Honor.
Jackson?
Very briefly, Lieutenant Tully,
Early.
you still have, I think it's 578, is it 578?
I have 577.
Is
578 is not marked yet.
oh, it's not? Where's the RTT record? Is that 577?
I have RTT records that are not marked in front of me.
May I approach?
Yes.
Move to admit.
So,
Objection.
so let's mark it for identification, Milton.
Did he say objection or no objection? He mumbles.
Just have the witness identify it.
Understand.
I think he's done this before, Bev, but
Letters.
you know.
Triple K. Thank you. You're looking at triple kilo, correct?
Yes, sir.
All right. When you created the arcs on your map, you also put on the map 5:18 a.m., correct?
Yes,
Where'd you get that number?
from the procedure start and end time.
So you did use the procedure start time and end time, correct?
To denote the time, but not, yeah, to denote the time on the slide, yes.
On the event, correct?
Yes,
All right, so the 5:18-19, I'm sorry, 5:18 and 19 seconds, and then, I don't have it in front of me, but 0.154, I think. Is that right?
yes,
That was the time that you used to establish that the device was on the first arc, correct?
no, I didn't use it to establish the arc. I used the distance to establish the arc, and I placed the time on the slide.
What time, Lieutenant Tully?
5:18.
The time that Verizon gave you as the start time, correct?
Yes, they're both 5:18.
Right. So there's a start time and a start distance from the tower. In other words, the event took place at this distance at this time start, correct?
No, you're using the wrong words. It says first distance.
I'm not using the wrong words.
Yes, sir. You said start distance. It's first distance.
Okay, fine. Okay, pick the words. First distance. Start time and first distance, correct?
Yes,
Then
those are on the record.
Right. Then Verizon gives you an end time, correct?
Yes,
And last distance, right? And you created your arc based on the start time and first distance versus the end time and last distance, correct?
no, the time weren't associated.
You're saying no is because that would require the device to travel at 135,000 miles an hour.
Objection. If the witness could please answer the question.
So let him finish,
Okay, sure.
and then the objection to that is sustained. You can ask it differently.
Go ahead.
The times were not part of the depiction of the range. While I will suggest to you that it is probably unbelievable that those are actually start and end times. What I'm saying is we don't know for certainty that that is the exact time, the first distance and the last distance. I'd have to look back at the records, but I also say that we have corroborating evidence to say that that is accurate.
So you'd have to look back at the records, correct?
Oh, he's a little
Yes.
pissy.
That is your record.
No,
That's
the-
what you looked at, isn't it?
The record's key.
What?
And where's the records key?
They were provided by Verizon.
Where are they, sir?
I don't have them in front of me.
Right. That's all.
Okay,
May we approach this briefly?
okay. Don't leave yet, Detective.
Oh my God. Mm-mm-mm-mm-mm. But will they? Will they do anything? I mean, blues are blues. They got us to this place, and I have no idea how. None of this makes sense to me. I have not seen one thing that has pointed to Karen Reed being guilty. I just don't. If all they've got nothing. I just, oh Lordy. There better be more because Jackson is literally showing or pointing out what he sees as huge flaws, and I have to agree with them. How did Karen Reed end up sitting here? Is it Proctor? Whatever. This is just the most bizarre thing. So we just heard that update from John Ray. He did the press conference. And I just received the packets that he handed out. And I also got, I do believe it was a statement that the one, I think she was a lawyer, that she put out. Yeah, that's the hi Chopper. That's just what we're talking about, actually. I just received the packets from John Ray that he had handed out at that press conference. And this, it's basically all regarding Victoria. I haven't looked through all of it. But it's very disturbing. I don't know. I know, Chopper. I don't know how I can share this information because I don't think I can show any of the drawings. I'll take a look. Oh, yeah,
Your Honor, I believe this is defense counsel's as well.
it's pretty bad, Chopper. It is. I know. Yeah, yeah. It's interesting. Yeah.
All right, your next witness, Mr. Lally.
Yes, Your Honor. The Commonwealth calls Sergeant Brian Gallerani to the stand.
True, Chopper. Well, the defense is looking happy. Oh, she is. Oh my God. Yeah. I'll go through it with my mods.
I do.
And I'll go from there. So who is this guy? Who is this guy? Another cop, right?
Whenever you're ready, Mr. Lally.
Thank you, Your Honor. Good afternoon.
You are unmuted.
Afternoon.
Could you please state your name and spell your last name for the jury?
Ryan Gallerani, Gallerani.
And what do you do for work, sir?
I'm currently employed as a sergeant for the Needham Police Department.
And how long in total have you been a member of the Needham Police Department?
I graduated the academy January of 2006.
And how long have you held the rank of sergeant?
Just under a year.
Now, prior to you holding the rank of sergeant, what was it that you did within the Needham Police Department?
I was a detective from September of 2014 to June of 2023.
Now, over the course of your work as a detective and sergeant with the Needham Police Department, what, if any, training have you received in regard to collection of biological samples?
As part of the sexual assault class I took in January of 2015, I was certified in DNA collection by the Mass State Police.
And can you explain a little bit to the jury about sort of what that certification process entailed or what it was that you did to become certified?
So I was specifically certified in buccal swabs, which is the process of collecting cells suitable for DNA comparison by swabbing inside of a person's cheek.
And that certification, is that up to date at this point?
Yes.
Now, at some point on January 16th, 2024, did you have occasion to collect buccal swabs or samples in relation to this case?
I did.
And fair to say, as far as your work with the Needham Police Department, you had no familiarity or work with the investigation on a Canton Police Department case?
Correct.
Or on a state police case involving incidents that occurred in the town?
Correct.
You didn't know any of the parties involved in the case?
I did not.
And so on January 16th, 2024, where did you go on that day?
I went to the Norfolk District Attorney's Office in Canton.
And who, if anyone, did you meet with? Who, if anyone, did you collect samples from on that day?
I collected samples from Sergeant Buchanan and Trooper Proctor.
And can you explain to the jury just briefly as far as the process of your collection, as far as what physically did you do?
So I physically swabbed the inside of their mouths with a cotton swab and collected the evidence, sealed it up in a buccal swab kit, photographed it, and brought it back to the Needham Police Department.
And when you brought it back to the police department, what did you do with it then?
I entered it into the evidence.
And did you do that in conformity, both the collection and the securing of the item, did you do that in conformity with your training and certification on buccal swab collection?
I did.
Now, with reference to those items, at some point were you informed that those items were to be transported to a voting technology lab in Lorton, Virginia?
I was.
And were there specific instructions as far as shipping was concerned that were provided by the Bodie Technology Lab?
Yes.
And the shipping that occurred in this case, was that in conformity with what Bodie had provided as far as the policies or protocols for shipping those types of materials?
It was.
Thank you, sir. I have nothing further.
What?
Anything?
Lolly.
Questions?
All right, you're all set, Sergeant.
Thank you.
very
Have a good
much.
day.
So what was that guy there for? Just to waste time? Jeez.
Yes, Your Honor. Call Mr. Nicholas Bradford to the stand.
Another 2-minute witness? What the hell are you doing, Lolly? Just what are you doing?
Step right up. Watch your step on me.
So mods, I will be going through these documents in a private chat in Discord.
Truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God.
Right. That's what I was thinking. Like, what? I don't understand this, man. I need to start drinking.
Sure.
I know, Chopper. If you need to, back
Good
away,
afternoon.
friend.
Could you please state your name and spell your last name for the jury?
Yep, it's Nicholas Bradford, Bradford.
And sir, that microphone before you is adjustable. You can place it anywhere that's comfortable for yourself, okay? What is it that you do for work?
I'm a DNA analyst for Bodie Technology in Lorton, Virginia.
Okay, you're definitely going to have to keep your voice up, sir. Okay.
Sorry about that.
Now, sir, if I could,
Sorry. It's Bodie Technology in Lorton, Virginia.
and for the record, Bodie is just spelled as far as B-O-D-E, is that correct?
Correct.
Now, sir, if I could just ask you some questions about your educational background, starting with your undergraduate. Where did you go for your undergraduate, and what, if any, degree did you receive from there?
I have a Bachelor of Science in Forensic Biology from Mercyhurst College in Erie, Pennsylvania.
And then following your graduation with that degree, where did you go?
I have a Master of Forensic Science in Forensic Molecular Biology from the George Washington University in Washington, D.C.
And when about was it that you received that master's?
It was around about 2011.
And with relation to your graduate work and your work at Bodie, when did your work at Bodie begin with relation to your graduate?
I started at Bodie at about 2009.
So during the course of your graduate school?
Yes.
What's Bodie?
And when you started with the Bodie lab, what was the sort of position or what did you start doing when you began?
I was a DNA technician. We assisted the analysts with their case files, and we primarily operated the different robotics and the different processes in the lab.
And at some point over the course of your work there, you then became an analyst, is that correct?
Yes.
And about how much time elapsed or how much time did you spend as a, excuse me, as a technician prior to becoming an analyst?
I was a technician for about a year, maybe two. And then I was in the data banking section as an analyst. And since then, I've worked in the high throughput casework group and the customized casework group.
Now, as far as your work within this particular field, have you had occasion to work at any other sort of labs or facilities?
Yes, for about 3 years, I worked at the Pennsylvania State Police DNA lab.
Now, Bodie Technology, as far as that lab is concerned, can you describe for the jury sort of what kind of lab that is? And let me ask you first by just about how many analysts work at Bodie Technology?
Somewhere in the neighborhood of maybe 100 analysts, give or take. We're a small private lab in Lorton, Virginia, and we do DNA work contracted through different police agencies throughout the country.
Now, in addition to police agencies, are there other types of entities that you would accept or that would send submissions for DNA casework?
Yes, we do some international work with human identification and that sort of thing as well.
Now, as far as the lab at Bodie Technologies, is that lab accredited?
Yes, we are accredited through the National Standards Institute.
And can you speak a little bit about that sort of accreditation process and what it means to be an accredited lab?
Yes, so that the National Standards Institute has a set of criteria for DNA labs doing forensic work. And we are audited against those criteria every year, sometimes internal audits and sometimes external audits.
Is that accreditation at the lab, is that up to, the accreditation, is it current as of now?
Yes.
Now, with reference to your work as a DNA analyst, can you describe, just in general terms to the jury, what it is that you do in reference, what is it that you do in reference to your work as a DNA analyst?
Yes, so we take in evidence that's submitted to us. We process it through the DNA processing. So there are 4 basic steps to DNA. There's extraction, so that's where we separate out the DNA. And then there's quantification, and that is basically just us determining how much DNA we have to work with. The next step is amplification. So depending on the case and the different processes that we're going to use, we're targeting a number of different locations in the genome, and we're going to make millions of copies of each of those locations. And in each one of those copies, there's a little fluorescent tag that we can then detect in the detection step, and that's the 4th step. And then that from there, we have the DNA profile for that sample.
Now, with reference to the lab, as far as training is concerned, you mentioned that you spent at least a year or 2 as a technician prior to becoming an analyst. What are some of the training?
Hey guys, well, you are not going to believe what Johnny Ray has.
Yes, so the training program involves a lot of scientific literature reading. There's a practical aspect to it where we're given known samples that we're to treat as if they were casework samples. So we process those as if they were casework. We have written and verbal exams, and we have a moot court exam at the end.
I'll see. Hey guys, well, you are
training sort of portions of over the course of work with the lab.
Yes.
Are you familiar with a term known as a proficiency test?
Yes.
And can you explain to the jury what that is and how it relates to your work as a DNA analyst at Bodie Technologies?
Yes, so part of our accreditation is we have to do proficiency testing twice a year. And that is when an outside company sends us known samples and we process them, again, as if they were casework. And then those results are sent to that outside company, and then we get the results back to see if we are proficient in those technologies or not.
And with respect to yourself, as far as the proficiency testing that you've undergone, what, if any, issues have you had with proficiency testing that you've undertaken?
I've passed all my proficiency tests.
Now, what is DNA?
So DNA is essentially the blueprint for a living thing. It's in most of our cells, and it's unique to an individual with the exception of identical twins.
Now, at some point in January of 2024, did you receive a particular assignment in regard to DNA analysis from a number of things that you received from Massachusetts?
Yes.
Okay,
And,
then.
specifically, can you describe the process as far as like when an item comes into the lab at Bodie Technology, how it's sort of processed, or how from the time of receipt to the time that the item gets to you? Can you explain a little bit about that process?
Yes, so the item is generally sent via UPS or FedEx. It arrives in our secure evidence room. That room has limited access to only certain individuals. And from that point on, when it's received, a chain of custody is started for that shipment. And anytime anyone touches or uses that item, we need to check it out from the secure evidence room. And then that's all logged on the chain of custody.
Now, when something comes in, is it assigned a sample name or a case number, an ID number in some way, shape, or form?
Yes.
And is it also identified by sort of the corresponding numbers from the external vendor where it came?
Yes.
Now, in reference to Bodie case number CCA 2416-0023, did you perform work in relation to that case?
Yes.
And there was a corresponding agency case number of 22-02184, is that correct?
Yes.
And that would have been from the outside vendor, at least one of them, as far as the Massachusetts State Police crime lab, correct?
Correct.
So there were a number of items that you received. If you could identify them for the jury, what you received and specifically sort of what you looked at.
Yes. So we received an apparent hair. We received an extract from a taillight from a vehicle, and we received 2 reference samples from 2 troopers from the Massachusetts State Police.
And in addition, was there a sample ID as far as the known standards?
Yes. So Bodie gives it our own our own item number. So in this case, the 2 reference samples were CCA 2416-0023 R03 and the same number R04 for the 2 reference samples.
Now, if I could just ask you to further expound upon as far as the CCA 2416-023, which is E01. There was an agency sample ID, is that correct? That was attached to that?
Yes.
What was that?
So that was 3-6.1.
Is there a description that comes from the external vendor as well as to sort of what that item is?
Yes. In this case, the sample was a shaft end of hair from exterior passenger side rear panel.
There's a specific mass registration plate that's associated with that hair as well, is that correct?
Yes.
And that was 3GC684, is that correct?
Correct.
Now, with reference to the R03 and R04, those were vehicle samples, is that correct?
Yes.
And R03 specifically, as far as the agency description, what, if anything, was provided as far as that?
For R03, that was the buccal swab from Yuri Begetic.
And as far as R04?
That was the buccal swab from Michael Proctor.
Now, with reference to the extract portion, that was E02, was that correct?
Yes.
And if you know when you say extract, can you explain to the jury sort of what you understand that term to me, or what is an extract as far as what you looked at?
Yes. So when I described the 4-step process earlier, so the extraction was already done prior to us receiving the item. So essentially the extract comes to us in a tube, and it's a liquid, and provided with that would be the negative control that was associated with it. So from that point, we have the quantification information from the lab that did the extraction. So then we would amplify and then detect the profile from there.
And just to be clear, as far as the E02 that you were talking about, as far as the extract that you had received, what was the agency description on that extract?
So that was the sample from passenger side taillight with the same registration number, and that was labeled as an extract.
Now, in addition to that, there was a known blood standard, which you indicated was item or agency sample ID 8-1.1.1.
Yes.
And what was the agency description on the known blood standard?
That would be from, excuse me. Sorry, that was the sample from John O'Keefe, the profile, I should say.
And so when you say the profile as what do you mean by that?
Yes, so the profile was generated by the Massachusetts State Police Lab, and then that profile was given to us to do a comparison.
Now, as far as the profile that was provided, as far as your observations of that, what, if any, issues did you observe in your observations of the profile that was provided by the State Police Crime Lab in Massachusetts?
It looked like a standard single source profile.
Now, starting with, as far as there was a STR processing that was conducted, correct?
Yes.
What does STR stand for?
It stands for short tandem repeats. And essentially what we're doing with that is it's the DNA process that we use in forensic testing, where the areas that we're amplifying are short repeats of a genetic sequence that repeat multiple times. And we're just measuring the number of times that sequence repeats. And those numbers together are the profile.
Now, as far as the profile from the, the profile from the extract that you received as far as EO2, from the passenger side tail light of the vehicle, what, if anything, were you able to determine based on your analysis and STR processing of that?
Yes, so we determined that it was consistent with a mixture of 3 individuals, including at least 1 male contributor.
And so, if you could just walk the jury through as far as the process, as far as the testing, what is it that you're actually doing in the lab? What are you looking at, and how are you making a comparison?
So once we have the DNA profile, like I said, we're measuring the number of times the sequence repeats at a given location. So we have a series of those, and then we compare that to the reference profile that we were provided, or that we generated for the 2 reference samples that we actually processed. And then we determine if it's possible that the individual whose reference profile it is could be a possible contributor to that mixture profile that we got from the evidence. And then we need to do a statistical calculation to determine the strength of that possibility of an inclusion.
Let me ask you a little bit about, as far as that statistical calculation, how is that done, or where does that come from?
So in this case, we did what's called a likelihood ratio. Essentially, what we're doing is comparing 2 explanations for the DNA profile that we observed. So if we have, say, person A, one explanation would be that the DNA profile is a mixture of person A and 2 unknown individuals. And then the other explanation would be that it's simply 3 unknown individuals and it's not person A. So then we compare those 2 explanations of the profile and determine which one is more likely.
Now, as far as the sort of reference samples that you had the DNA profile of John O'Keefe, correct?
Correct.
And I'm sorry. Before starting that, you had the extract with DNA profile with multiple contributors from the tail.
Yes.
So then you have the known blood standards or DNA profile from John O'Keefe, correct?
Yes.
And then you have the buccal samples from Uri Buchanan and Michael Proctor, correct?
Yes.
And so with reference to those specifically, as far as the reference samples, is that what you're generating the DNA profiles from?
So we're comparing those references to the mixture that we obtained from the tail light. Yeah.
And so in your comparison, let me start with the known one as far as John O'Keefe. What, if anything, did you find from your comparison of the John O'Keefe DNA profile to the DNA profile from the tail light?
Yeah, so in this case, when comparing the John O'Keefe profile, assuming a mixture of 3 individuals, it is at least 740 nonillion times more likely to be observed if it originated from John O'Keefe and 2 unknown unrelated individuals than if from 3 unknown unrelated individuals. And we provide a sort of verbal qualifier to that because most people probably don't have a lot of experience with nonillion. So in this case, that would be very strong support for inclusion.
If you know nonillion, how many zeros are we talking?
So that would be the number with 30 zeros.
And so that would be a strong support for inclusion, correct?
Yes.
Now, with regard to your comparison, with regard to your work as a DNA analyst, is there any kind of software that you use in the course of your analysis with regard to an SDR mix?
Yes, when there's a mixture profile, we often use what's called StarMix, and it's essentially a computer program that we input the DNA profile, and it allows us to use a series of mathematical equations to help us interpret that mixture.
Was that done in this case as well?
Yes, and then we use that same program to run the statistics.
Now, with regard to the sample, the buccal sample attributed from Yuri Buchanan, did you run that for a comparison as well?
Yes.
And what, if anything, were your findings in relation to your analysis of that?
So in that case, assuming a mixture of 3 individuals, the DNA profile obtained is at least 46 million times more likely to be observed if it originated from 3 unknown, unrelated individuals than if from Yuri Begenik and 2 unknown, unrelated individuals. So that sounds confusing given what I just said. So the verbal qualifier for that would be very strong support for exclusion.
I'm sorry, very strong support for exclusion, is that correct?
Correct.
And then similarly, as you were testifying, what, if anything, did you find from your analysis comparison of the buccal sample or DNA profile from Michael Proctor?
Yes, so in that case, assuming a mixture of 3 individuals, it is at least 76,000 times more likely to be observed from 3 unknown, unrelated individuals than if from Michael Proctor and 2 unknown, unrelated individuals. So that would be strong support for exclusion.
So correct me if I'm wrong, but your findings with regard to 3 samples is strong inclusion or strong support for inclusion of John O'Keefe, is that correct?
It'd be very strong support for inclusion.
And strong support for exclusion of both Yuri Buchanan and Michael Proctor, correct?
Correct.
Now, sir, in addition to that, you had mentioned that there was an E01 sample that was a shaft end of a hair from the exterior passenger side rear panel of that same vehicle with the same Massachusetts license plate, correct?
Correct.
Now, with regard to DNA as it pertains to hair samples, can you describe for the jury sort of that process and so what is it that you're looking when you receive a hair sample as far as an extraction is concerned? How does that process work, or what are you getting that extraction from?
Yes, so when we have a hair, generally we'll take a look at it, and a forensic biologist will give their opinion on if it's likely that we'll obtain a profile from that hair, because hairs can be a little tricky. So in this case, the forensic biologist determined that the hair would likely not provide a great profile from STR testing, but we went ahead with it anyway, just because sometimes it does work. But in this case, we extract it, and that involves dissolving the hair and forming an extract like the other samples. And then we quantified the hair in this case, and the quantification that I used targets what is called autosomal DNA or nuclear DNA. And in that case, the results were below the limit of detection. So we did not process that sample forward for STRs because we would not have obtained a useful DNA profile from it.
Sir, if I could just take it back a little bit in that. Earlier in your statement right there, you just indicated that hair samples or DNA from hair can be a little tricky. Can you expound upon that and explain to the jury sort of what you mean by that?
Yes. A lot of times, hairs are, unless they have a root attached, they're not a great sample for nuclear STR testing. They can be, but it's sometimes hit or miss.
As far as what's actually being tested as far as STR when it comes to hair, it's not the actual hair. Is that correct?
I'm not sure I follow. Can you?
Let me ask you this. You're familiar with the term follicular tissue?
Yes.
Can you explain to the jury what that means in relation to a hair sample and DNA testing?
Yes. So when there's a follicle attached, that's generally where you will get the nuclear DNA from, not the hair itself.
And the follicle would necessarily be attached to the root end and not to the shaft, correct?
Correct.
Now, As far as autosomal DNA, can you explain what is autosomal DNA and sort of where does that come from within DNA testing?
Yeah, so you can think about that more as nuclear DNA. So that would be DNA that's in the nucleus of the cell. So that's what most people think of when they think of DNA. But there are there's other forms of DNA. So like, for example, mitochondrial DNA that exists outside the nucleus.
And as far as the testing that you performed in regard to this hair sample, that was STR testing, is that correct?
Yes.
And I'm sorry, what were the findings again with relation to the STR test?
Yes. So like I said, we quantified the hair and it was below the limit of detection. So we did not process that hair forward for STR.
Now, as far as that terminology, below the limit of detection, can you explain a little bit to the jury sort of what that means as it applies to the testing that you conduct?
Yes. So the instrumentation has a limit of detection. So there could be potentially small amounts of DNA there, but it's below the limit that we are confident to say that there is DNA present. So we would normally not process those samples forward.
Now, that hair sample, as far as the one that you tested, you mentioned that it was not initially advisable, I guess, for STR testing, and just went ahead and did it anyway because sometimes it works. Is that correct?
Yes, it's usually worth a try.
And then beyond that, that hair sample within your lab, as far as voting technology, was that given to a different analyst for a different type of testing?
Yes, we decided it was worth a try to do mitochondrial DNA testing on the hair.
And is that a type of testing that you yourself perform?
No, that would not be me.
And why would it not be?
I was not trained in mitochondrial testing.
That's sort of a specialized subset as far as different training and different type of testing that occurs?
Yes.
Just in general terms, if you know, could you explain to the jury sort of the difference between what you've termed as nuclear or autosomal DNA versus mitochondrial DNA?
Yes, so very basically, the nuclear DNA is the DNA that exists in the nucleus. The mitochondrial DNA is the DNA that exists outside the nucleus in the mitochondria. And the mitochondrial DNA is inherited directly from the mother. So if you were to test maternally related individuals, they would have the same mitochondrial profile.
And that other analyst that conducted the mitochondrial DNA, familiar with who that person is?
Yes, that was test chart.
Okay, one moment, Charles.
Sure.
Thank you very much, sir. I have no further questions.
Okay,
We have no questions.
great. So you are all set, Mr. Bradford.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
What, Lally?
So the jurors, we will take our luncheon break and we'll have more witnesses here for you this afternoon. So let's say 45 minutes.
Okay, let's say, do we get to jump? Oh, don't do that. Oh, we do. There we go. Lunch over.
Step right up here and just go step.
Why in the courtroom, please? Here, raise your right hand. Do you solemnly swear the honest the court and jury in the case down here and the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God?
I do.
Thank you. You can take the state.
Why was Bev side-eyeing her?
Go right ahead, Mr. Lally.
Thank you, Your Honor. Good afternoon, ma'am.
Good afternoon.
Would you please state your name and spell your last name, jury?
Sure. My name is Tess Chart, Chart.
And Ms. Char, what do you do for work?
I'm a forensic DNA analyst at Bodie Technology.
And where is voting technology located?
It's in Lorton, Virginia.
And I'll ask you some questions, just a little bit about your educational background, starting with your undergraduate work. Where did you go to school, and what, if any, degree did you receive in relation to your undergraduate?
Sure. I have my bachelor's in science in molecular biology from Millersville University in Pennsylvania. And then I have my Master's of Science in Forensic Science from Towson University in Maryland.
So, Ms. Chad, I'm going to ask you to keep your voice up really loud, okay? Thank
What
you.
about Lally?
Ms. Shard, if it's at all helpful, that microphone is adjustable. You can move it anywhere. Now,
Lally,
with
we can't
reference
hear
to
you.
your master's in forensic science, when about was that you received?
So I got my degree at the end of 2019.
And following grad school, where did you go from
I was hired directly by Bodhi Technology.
there? And when was that?
That was in July of 2019.
Now, when you started in July of 2019 with Bodhi Technology, what was your position at that time, and sort of what were your duties and responsibilities when you initially began work?
So I started as a technologist. So that's someone that will do all of the lab portion of the work in a laboratory. And I helped out with our humanitarian team, so helping identify human remains. From there, I also helped with our criminal cases as well.
And when you started your work there, what, if any, sort of training did you undergo in relation to your work at Bodhi?
So when you first start at Bodhi Technology, you actually go through a series of lectures and you have a series of readings to go through all of the science that you're going to learn and the background of all of the technologies you're going to use. From there, you will observe a qualified analyst or a qualified person in the lab, go through everything that you're going to be trained in. And from there, you'll get a series of sets. So there'll be mock samples that you will take through the lab and do all of the testing on that you're going to be trained in. And it starts out with having that qualified analyst there with you, and you're able to ask questions and troubleshoot as you go. From there, you'll get a second set that'll be no analyst with you, but you're still allowed to ask questions at that point. And then your final set is something that we call a competency set. So you take it through the lab and treat it just like you would any other case. And you're not allowed to ask questions, and then you're graded at the end. If you pass that test, you can go through a written exam and then a verbal exam. And then you take your results from your testing and you defend it in a mock court sample. If you pass all of those qualifications, you can become an analyst or become qualified in whatever lab technique you're being trained in.
And as far as that sort of training process went, how long was it from the time that you joined Bodhi Technology to the time that you started doing the work that you do now?
It's been a rolling process of all the different trainings that I've had to go through. I'd say it took me about 9 months from when I started to be qualified in everything that I do for mitochondrial DNA testing. And then for analysis training, I think it was another 6 months or so.
Now, as far as the lab at Bodhi Technology, is that an accredited lab?
Yes, it is.
And do you know from whom the lab receives its accreditation?
Yes, we receive a international accreditation from an association called ANAB, which is just a national standards organization. We're also accredited by the FBI at their quality standards as well.
If you could just keep your voice up.
Would you like me to repeat that?
No.
Okay.
Ms. Chard, as far as your lab being accredited, can you explain to the jury sort of what that means and sort of what the process is for lab to be accredited?
Sure. So all of our testing, all of the things that we report are basically guidelined by an outside body. So everything we do is established and gone through before or as we go through the testing procedures. So we're able to make sure that everything that we do is standardized for the country, all the testing that we perform.
And the lab that you work at Bodhi Technology, is that accreditation up to grade at this point?
It is.
Now, with reference to your own work within the lab, is there sort of standards of procedure or protocols that you follow in conformity with that accreditation?
There are. We're under the same standards as all other DNA testing at Bodie for mitochondrial DNA testing.
Now, with regard to your specific work, are you familiar with what's called a proficiency test?
Yes, I am.
Can you explain to the jury what that is and what your experience has been with proficiency testing as far as how often and what it consists of?
So a proficiency test is how we stay qualified in what we do in the laboratory. So we get an outside test that we treat just like a regular criminal case. We take it all the way through the laboratory and have it reviewed, report our findings, and then it's sent out and we're graded on that performance.
And with reference to yourself, what, if any, issues have you had with regard to proficiency testing over the course of your years of work with Bodie Technology?
I've had none.
Now, as far as, am I correct in that Bodie Technology, as far as the lab is concerned, essentially deals with being contracted for work from external vendors?
Yes.
By that, I mean as far as you get your work or samples that are submitted from outside of your lab, correct?
We do.
And what are some of the types of organizations that, as far as the casework that you deal with, like where does it typically come from? What type of agency?
It can come from anywhere across the United States, and we also have international clients as well.
Now, if I could turn your attention to a specific case that you worked on. When items come into Bodie Technology, as far as the lab, they go through sort of a check-in process and a chain of custody process. Is that correct?
Yes, that's correct.
And with that, is there sort of a number or something that's assigned to a specific sample that follows it throughout the time that it's at your lab?
Yes, we'll call that the evidence item number, or E- whatever number it's assigned.
Is there also a case number that's assigned as far as different cases or different case submissions?
Yes, there is.
And turning your attention to a specific case that was submitted in January or partially submitted in January and then partially submitted in March of 2024. That came from the Norfolk District Attorney's Office. Are you familiar with that?
Yes, I am.
And the Bodie case number on that was CCA 2416-0023. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Now, with reference to your work on this specific case number, what were the items that you received and sort of what were the items that you received that you eventually did some testing or analysis on?
So I continued testing for one of the hair samples.
And specifically, again, that's given a specific name as far as in the hair sample in this case was EO1, is that correct?
That is correct.
And then as far as for comparison purposes, what, if anything, did you receive in regard to comparison if you were able to generate a profile from EO1?
We received a reference profile from the victim, John O'Keefe.
Now, your specialty within the lab is in mitochondrial DNA testing, is that correct?
Yes.
Could you explain to the jury as far as the mitochondrial DNA? Let me ask you this first. Are you also familiar with the term known as autosomal DNA?
I am, yes.
If you could, Ms. Chart, explain to the jury first what autosomal DNA is, and then what mitochondrial DNA is, and then I'll have another question.
Of course. So what many people are familiar with is what we call autosomal DNA. So that's the DNA that's actually stored in the nucleus of your cell. You get half from your mother and half from your father, and it's what makes you unique. And it's what people call the blueprint of a person. But what might be a new concept is that there's actually a second form of DNA that is stored within the mitochondria of a cell. So if you can remember maybe back to any science classes that you had, the mitochondria is the powerhouse of that cell. And because of that, you can have upwards of hundreds to thousands of mitochondria within just one single cell. And within each of those mitochondria, you may have thousands of copies of that mitochondrial DNA. So in cases just like this one, where there may not be enough nuclear or autosomal DNA to find, you can go back and try to test for that mitochondrial DNA.
And so if you could explain to the jury some, I think you've alluded to it already, but sort of the difference between autosomal DNA versus mitochondria.
So mitochondrial DNA, in contrast, is inherited directly from your mother. So you will have the same mitochondrial DNA profile as your mother, and then you will also have the same mitochondrial DNA profile as any of your siblings. And it has that maternal inheritance that we call it, that makes it actually a great source for helping identify people, but it can also be used for criminal cases as well.
First, with respect to the autosomal DNA, can you explain to the jury sort of the process as far as just in general terms? What is the process as far as the testing goes or generation of profile?
Sure. So we share similar processing methods. So we will start out by taking a small portion of whatever is sent to the lab, and we call that sampling. We'll take notes on that and how much that we take forward through testing, and that will go into a small tube. From there, we will extract the DNA or take apart all of the cells by adding chemicals. And what we're left with is what we call a DNA extract. So that's actually where I came in this case. From there, the difference is we will go through what is still called amplification using the PCR method. That will make a bunch of copies of that DNA to be used later on. But for mitochondrial DNA, what we're targeting is specifically just the mitochondrial DNA in that extract. From there, we actually go to something that is completely different from autosomal testing, which is DNA sequencing. So DNA sequencing is really just a way that we are able to take those small strands of DNA that we've amplified, and we're able to read them almost like letters in a sentence.
And the PCR is in reference to the autosomal DNA, is that correct?
It's for both methods.
What does PCR stand for?
It's a polymerase chain reaction.
And when you say as far as the sort of quantification, I'm sorry, is it quantification or quantitation?
Quantification works.
As far as the quantification step is concerned, how is that sort of physically done? What kind of instrumentality are you using to accomplish that?
So for mitochondrial DNA, we will actually run the DNA after amplification on a gel. So a long, really what it sounds like, slab of gel, where we're able to visualize if we obtained any mitochondrial DNA as a band that shows up under a camera.
So with reference to this sample, this EO1, the hair sample, you received it at what stage again, or what step?
I received it as a DNA extract. So it was a amount of liquid in a tube at that point.
And as far as in general terms, again, if you could explain to the jury, so what are the steps that go into the processing or analysis prior to that step where you received it on the quantification?
So it went through sampling, it was received, it was inventoried by the person that opened up the evidence, and a small portion or the hair was put into a tube, and then it went through that DNA extraction. So the hair was dissolved and all of the DNA inside of that hair was released and isolated to just be then that DNA extract.
So from that point where you pick it up as sort of the extract, what is it that you're doing with that as far as your analysis goes from there, and what type of instrumentality are you using to perform that analysis?
So from there, I am targeting and just trying to find if there is any mitochondrial DNA in that sample. So we'll use the PCR method to amplify to see if there is any mitochondrial DNA we can target. And then I will take it through and visualize it on that gel to make sure to see if we got anything. That is our quantification step. And then after that, I will take it through our sequencing step. And we do load that on an instrument called the 3130 genetic analyzer.
And the 3130 genetic analyzer, how does that work?
So it actually runs and separates each of the fragments of DNA that we have amplified and visualizes it through a program. So we're able to read each letter of your DNA sequence.
Like, I can take you back just a step. Are you familiar with a term within your field called a D-loop?
Yes.
Can you explain to the jury what a D-loop is and how that factors into your analysis of testing for mitochondria?
So the D-loop is actually the region of the mitochondrial genome that we target. It is targeted because it does not contain any useful areas for the actual function of a mitochondria. So it can change over time, and those changes are what actually are recorded as your mitochondrial DNA profile.
Now, as far as the D-loop, what, if any, relationship does that have with respect to certain variables within the human population?
Would you be able to word that?
Very poorly put. Let me rephrase. The D-loop, as far as the region is concerned, what, if anything, does that have to do with certain variabilities within the human population?
Oh, yes. So because there is this variability in that region, it can change over time. And from that, there are different mitochondrial DNA profiles that are developed across the world.
Now, in addition to the extract from the hair sample E01, what, if any, other items did you receive in regard to comparison?
So we also received that reference sample from the victim, and that was taken forward for mitochondrial DNA testing as well.
And just for clarity purposes, when you say reference sample from the victim, you're referring to John O'Keefe, is that correct?
Yes.
And the reference sample that you received in regard to John O'Keefe, was that already an extract as well, or what, if anything, did you have to do with that in order to obtain a mitochondrial DNA profile?
So that sample was received, if I can refer to my notes. I did not. So I was not the person to actually do the sampling for this sample. It was received as a small cutting of a swab.
And so, as far as the small cutting from the swab, what is sort of, as far as creating a profile from that, creating a profile from the extract from the hair sample as well, was there any difference in that, sort of how those two mitochondrial DNA profiles were created?
No, they were tested the same way.
And well, let me ask this. As far as with regard to the hair sample E01, were you able to obtain a mitochondrial DNA profile for the hair?
We were.
And with respect to Mr. O'Keefe's sample, were you also able to obtain a mitochondrial DNA profile from Mr. O'Keefe's sample?
Yes, we were.
Now, as far as for comparison purposes, what, if anything, did you look at, and what, if any, comparison or opinions or conclusions did you draw from that comparative analysis?
Sure, I can state directly from my report if that's all right.
Okay.
So the mitochondrial DNA profile that was obtained from the sample, the hair sample, was consistent with the mitochondrial DNA profile obtained from John O'Keefe. So therefore, John O'Keefe cannot be excluded as a possible contributor of that hair.
Now, Ms. Chart, are you also familiar with something called an MPOP?
So this is the one hair that they talk about?
I am.
Can you explain to the jury what that
Ah!
is and how that's used as far as any sort of statistical analysis in reference to comparative comparison?
So it's a international populations database that houses different mitochondrial DNA profiles.
And how is it sort of used within your field, and how did you use it in this specific instance in relation to the consistency opinion between the hair sample and Mr. O'Keefe's?
So we were able to upload the profile from the hair and see if it was found at all within the population database. We test populations that are popular within the United States to narrow it down. And within the African American, US Caucasian, and US Hispanic databases that they have, it was not seen.
And what, if any, conclusions or opinions are you then able to formulate with reference to the consistency of the hair sample versus Mr. O'Keefe's sample with relation to that MPOP data?
Sure. So by not seeing it in the database, this means that we're able to exclude at least 99.895% of the population from being a source of that evidence.
And is there a certain level or percentage of confidence statistically that comes along with that exclusion of 99.895% of the U.S. population?
Yes, we use what is called the 95% confidence interval. It's actually a rule that is used for making statistical statements about populations. It's because there are always outliers that we don't include. We take the 95% majority of a population when we run those statistics.
And so, again, as far as your opinion or conclusions based on the comparison, is that the mitochondrial DNA profile from the hair sample was consistent with the mitochondrial DNA profile from Mr. O'Keefe's sample, correct?
Correct.
And that's with a 95% confidence, is that correct?
That is correct.
And that's the exclusion of at least 99.895% of the population of the United States, correct?
Correct.
Thank you, ma'am. I have nothing further.
We have no questions, Your Honor.
All right, Ms. Chad, you are all set.
Oh my God. Oh, Lolly.
Your next witness, Mr. Lally?
Yes, Your Honor. The Commonwealth will call Mr. Andre Porto to the stand.
He's the guy that scrubbed the toilets at the bar they were at. Really, Lolly? How did that one lonely hair get there? They threw a blizzard.
Look right this way. Watch your step.
Please stand and face the court. Raise your right hand. You solemnly swear the evidence you give the court and jury in the case down here and the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God. You can take the stand.
Whenever you're ready, Mr. Lally.
Thank you. Good afternoon, sir.
Good afternoon.
First, let me just say that, just for clarification, that microphone in front of you is adjustable. You can move it up and
Okay,
down
cool.
any which way. Good afternoon, sir. Could you please state your name and spell your last name for the jury?
Yeah, my name is Andre Porto, last name spelled Porto.
And what do you do for work, sir?
I'm a forensic scientist too at the Massachusetts State Police Crime Lab in the DNA unit.
And sir, if I could ask you just a few questions about your educational background, starting with your undergraduate work. Where did you go to school, and what, if any, degrees did you receive from that?
I received a Bachelor of Science in Microbiology at the University of Massachusetts in Amherst. And then,
And where did you go from there?
I went to the Boston University School of Medicine and I got a Master of Science in Biomedical Forensic Sciences.
And about what year was that you received that master's?
I graduated 2019.
And then following receipt of your master's, where did you go?
I went to the DNA unit in the Massachusetts State Police Crime Lab.
And when you joined the Massachusetts State Police Crime Lab initially, what was your title and sort of what was your duties and responsibilities?
I hope soon, Harley.
So I joined as a forensic scientist 1, and that's a training position where I underwent a training program that consisted of a bibliography with multiple journal articles and textbooks, as well as conducting the lab processing on training samples.
And that sort of initial work that you did as referred to as an FS1, is that correct?
Yes.
And that initial work that you did as an FS1, how long did you do that before you became a forensic scientist 2?
Approximately, the training itself was approximately 6 to 8 months. And then within a year, I was promoted to an FS2.
And when you were promoted to work as an FS2, what, if any, specific unit were you assigned to within the lab?
The DNA unit.
And have you essentially been with the DNA unit since that assignment initially occurred?
Yes.
Now, just a few questions about the lab at the State Police Crime Laboratory. Is that lab accredited by anybody?
Yes, we are accredited by ANAB, and that stands for ANSI, National Accreditation Board, and the ANSI stands for American National Standards Institute.
And with reference to that accreditation, can you describe to the jury just a little bit about generally in terms of what goes into an accreditation of a lab from ANAB?
Yeah, so this organization, ANAB, they came into our lab and they reviewed all of our protocols, ranging from facility security to the protocols that we do in the lab to staff education and training, and to make sure that we're meeting all the standards that we are being accredited to.
And the lab at MSPCL, its accreditation, is it up to date at this point?
Yes.
With reference to yourself personally, sir, in regard to your casework, in regard to your training, are you familiar with the term proficiency testing?
Yes.
And can you explain to the jury what that is and sort of how often and what consists of the proficiency testing that you've done?
Yeah, so a proficiency test is given on a semi-annual basis, so twice a year, by an outside agency, and we don't know what the results are, and we treat it as a regular case. So we take it through the regular DNA processing, and we have to pass that proficiency test to show that we maintain our competency in whatever work that we are doing in casework.
And sir, as far as the proficiency testing that you've undergone, what have been the results of your proficiency testing?
I've passed all of mine.
Now, sir, it may be a term that's pretty well understood, but if you could explain to the jury, at least based on your training experience, what your understanding is of a couple of different terms. And first one, I'm going to start with DNA itself. What is DNA?
Yeah, so DNA stands for deoxyribonucleic acid, and that is basically the genetic blueprint that makes us who we are. And we each have 2 copies of it. We inherited one from our mom and one from our dad, and that combination makes us unique. And with the exception of identical twins, everybody has a different DNA.
And is DNA the same in every cell of a person's body?
Yes, barring any rare mutations, DNA is the same. So if you take a blood sample and a saliva sample from the same person, the DNA should be the same.
And what I'm going to ask you now is just a little bit about the process of DNA and how it's tested within your lab. Am I correct in saying that there's essentially 4 steps? Is that correct?
Correct.
And approaching sort of chronologically, one of the steps is called extraction, correct?
Yes.
Can you explain to the jury how it is specifically that DNA is extracted by yourself in general terms when you're testing it?
Yes. So for this extraction step, so I receive the samples. They're in like small tubes. They're closed. I will add a set of reagents to it, apply heat to that sample, and that will actually burst open the cells to make the DNA available for use.
When you are extracting from a sample, do you know, or is there a way to sort of measure how much DNA you're extracting from a sample?
Yes.
And can you explain sort of how it is that you know that?
Yeah, so that's the second step that we call quantitation. And we take a small portion of that DNA that we extracted, and we'll apply a different set of reagents and run it through an instrument that heats and cools down the sample, goes through a cycle, and allows us to estimate how much DNA is extracted.
Now, so what is PCR?
PCR is stands for polymerase chain reaction, and it's basically known as molecular Xeroxing, where it's making millions of copies of specific areas that you can target of the DNA.
I'm sorry, I didn't mean to step over.
Sorry.
Is that essentially the third step that you undergo?
Correct.
Now, what is a STR?
It stands for short tandem repeat, and these are locations in the DNA that change each person. So it's comprised of small little repeats, and each person, however repeats you have at that location, is sort of what will show up in your DNA profile.
Now, how is it with your work in the lab that you identify DNA fragments?
It's the fourth step where we call detection, where after we amplified the specific areas that we are looking at in the DNA, we'll run it through an instrument that will separate them out and generate the DNA profile.
Now, within your work in the lab, are you familiar with terminology as far as a known item versus a question item?
Yes.
And can you explain what each of those mean in reference to your field and your work, and sort of what is the difference between the two?
Yeah, so a known item is an item that's collected directly from an individual and is to be used for comparison purposes, whereas a questioned item is collected from, let's say, like a crime scene where we don't know the source.
Now, as far as your lab or your unit within the lab, are there the DNA unit itself, does it follow sort of standardized policies and protocols?
Yes, we do.
And who approves of those particular policies and protocols and procedures?
Our technical leader.
Now, could you explain the process used to analyze the evidence in this case?
Yeah, so the evidence in this case underwent that four-step process I just described, and which was extraction to quantitation to amplification, detection, and then interpretation of the profile that was generated.
Now, what are some of the controls or what do you use when during the course of your testing?
Yeah, so there are two types of controls, positive and negative controls. So a positive control is a sample with a known DNA profile that we use to show that each step in the process worked as expected. And a negative control is a sample that has no DNA in it and that only receives the reagents that we are using. And that is to show that there's no inherent contamination of the reagents that we used.
Let me ask you, sir, if you know, what are some of the ways to prevent sort of DNA transfer from yourself or from someone else working on the case or from other samples that you may be working on with other cases?
Yeah, so there are many ways. One way is to clean the workspace before we start working and after, just to make sure that it's constantly being cleaned. Another way is to wear lab PPE, so personal protective equipment like lab coats, face masks, and hairnets. And another one is to make sure that we only have one tube open at a time so that we don't have any cross-contamination between samples.
Now, your work specifically, sir, does it undergo some sort of review process?
It does.
And specifically, your work in this case, did it undergo that same sort of general review process pursuant to the policies and procedures you were speaking about before?
Yes, it did.
Now, when a case comes into the Massachusetts State Police Crime Lab, it's assigned a specific case number, correct?
Correct.
And in this instance, I'm referring to a case number entitled 22-02184. Familiar with that case?
I am.
And you did tested a number of different items within that case, correct?
Correct.
Now, as far as the items are concerned, similar to how the items from a specific investigation or case are assigned a case number, are those different items assigned different item numbers as well?
Yes, they are.
And if there is something that is taken, swabbed, or cut, or something from a specific item, how is that labeled in relation to the item that it was taken from?
So basically, let's say we have a parent item that's numbered 2-1. And then if we take a cutting of that item, it would be called, if it's the first cutting, it would be called 2-1.1.
Now, in this case, sir, was a known standard process?
Yes, it was.
And can you explain to the jury sort of how that process occurs in regard to processing a known standard?
Yeah, so the lab processing is the same, where it undergoes the same four-step process. And a qualified analyst then looked at the DNA profile that was generated to make sure that it was a single source profile, meaning at each location that we looked at, there were only one or two peaks. And after that, it underwent the technical and administrative review process before it was closed out and ready for use for comparison.
Do you know whose known DNA standard was processed in this case?
Yes.
And who was it?
A known blood standard from John O'Keefe.
Now, as far as your involvement in this case, what was your involvement in this case?
I performed the testing of the questioned items.
And did you have occasion to perform DNA analysis on certain items submitted to your lab in connection with this case?
Yes, I did.
And let me ask you about some specific items. Were you asked to perform some analysis on a item labeled 3-1.1?
Yes, I was.
And if you know, what was that a sample from?
Would I be able to refer to my notes? Thank you. So that was a sample from passenger side tail light.
And with respect to that, there was a sample that was, or DNA profile that was generated from that swab from the taillight, correct?
Correct.
And what, if anything, were the findings, or what kind of, what was the conclusion of the analysis of the profile from the swab taken from the taillight of the vehicle?
The DNA profile was interpreted as a 3-person mixture, including male DNA.
And to be more specific, when an item comes in, it's assigned an item number. There's also a description that's provided along with sort of where the item came from.
Correct.
And so specifically, item 3-1.1 is a sample from passenger side taillight, and it gives a specific Massachusetts registration plate of 3GC684, correct?
Correct.
And so from the analysis of the swab or the profile that was obtained from the swab from the taillight, what, if anything, was that compared to?
John O'Keefe, standard.
So the sample from Mr. O'Keefe?
Correct.
And with regard to that, was that a comparative analysis that you conducted yourself?
Yes.
And what, if any, opinions or conclusions did you come from as far as the comparative analysis between the swab from the taillight from that vehicle and the profile from Mr. O'Keefe?
The DNA profile from this item is at least 510 non-alien times more likely if it originated from John O'Keefe and 2 unknown individuals than if it originated from 3 unknown, unrelated individuals, and this provides support for an inclusion.
And now, sir, with reference to that item in that comparative analysis, you said 510 non-alien times, is that correct?
Correct.
And non-alien, just for clarification purposes, do you know how many zeros that is?
It's a 1 followed by 27 zeros.
And with regard to that item coming from, or the profile containing the comparative analysis consistent with the DNA profile of Mr. O'Keefe, there are also 2 unknown contributors, is that correct?
Correct.
Now, with regard to that, are you familiar with that item or the profile from that item being submitted along with some other samples to an outside vendor called Sade Technology?
Correct.
Now, with reference to another item contained within that, are you familiar with an item 3-6?
Yes.
And what is item 3-6?
That is the root end of hair from exterior passenger side rear panel.
Now, sir, as far as hair is concerned,
The one
share
hair.
for the jury a little bit about sort of DNA and how that works between. Well, let me ask you this: there's essentially, when it comes to a hair sample, there's typically going to be a root end and a shaft end, correct?
Correct.
And where from the DNA, as your lab is concerned, where is that? Where are you able to sort of test from, or where would you be looking to extract a sample from in order to perform testing?
Yes. So our testing for hairs, the DNA will be coming from any tissue that might be attached to the root end of the hair.
And so you're looking for specifically sort of follicular tissue, is that correct?
Tissues attached to the hair, yes.
Now, as far as you familiar with the terms sort of autosomal DNA versus mitochondrial DNA?
Yes, I am.
And can you explain for the jury briefly just sort of what your understanding is of each of those 2 terms and what, if any, differences there are between the 2?
Yeah, so autosomal DNA is present in the nucleus of the cell. That is, we inherited that from 1 copy from our dad, 1 copy from our mom. As mitochondrial DNA is present within the mitochondria, and that is inherited via the mother.
Now, your lab at the Massachusetts State Police Crime Laboratory, is the lab equipped, or does your lab do mitochondrial DNA testing?
We're not equipped to do mitochondrial testing.
And so when you say that the lab is not equipped to do the testing, what exactly does that mean?
So we don't have the instruments or the facilities to do that testing, and we don't get that testing requested very often. So it makes more sense to send it out to an approved vendor to do that testing.
And one of those approved vendors would be the Voda Technology Lab in Lorton, Virginia, that you were discussing previously.
Correct.
And as far as your understanding is that Voda Technology is equipped and does do mitochondrial DNA testing, correct?
Correct.
Now, with respect to your testing, you did some testing with regard to item 3-6 of the hair, is that correct?
Correct.
And can you explain to the jury sort of what that testing was and what, if any, opinions or conclusions you were able to draw from the testing that you were able to do in the lab?
Yes, so that testing began the same way as the 4-step process. I extracted the hair and then went to quantitation. After quantitation, I determined that there was no human DNA detected. So then testing was halted at that step.
And so what, if anything, was the result of that testing?
Oh,
that you
Lordy.
conducted with regard to that?
That no human DNA was detected, so STR analysis was not performed.
Now, that phraseology there, as far as no human DNA detected, what does that mean?
So quantitation is looking specifically for human DNA, and we couldn't detect that with our instruments. It's not speaking to the hair itself. It's just that we could not detect any human DNA.
That's not so much to say that there is no DNA on the hair, it's just that it is below the level of detection that you're qualified to report. Is that fair to say?
You're correct.
Now, with
the
regard
hell?
to the taillight sample, if I could step back to that. For a
What
second.
did we just learn about that hair?
510 non-alien times. What, if any, relationship does that have to sort of the overall world human population?
So the world population, I think, currently is about 8 billion, which is an 8 followed by 9 zeros. And 510 non-alien has 30 zeros in it.
Wow.
So it's larger,
Yeah.
Significantly more. correct?
significantly larger, sir. Yes.
Now, sir, if I could turn your attention to some other items that you tested in relation to this case.
What?
And just to be clear, sir, you conducted or issued about 6 different DNA reports in regard to the testing that you conducted in this case, is that correct?
Correct.
So if I could direct your attention now to the 6 reported DNA testing report number 6. That involved an item called 3-3.1, is that correct?
Correct.
And what is the description of that item?
Oh, wait, I'm sorry. Got the wrong report.
Don't forget to smash that thumb for me, everybody. Get me into that algorithm.
That is a sample from a parent glass on rear bumper.
Thank you.
With the same mass registration plate as the taillight, is that correct?
What
Correct.
did you see?
And what, if any, conclusions or opinions were you able to draw from your analysis of the testing on that particular item?
So at the quantitation step for this item, insufficient human DNA was detected and STR analysis was not performed.
And again, just as far as that statement is concerned, can you explain a little bit to the jury what that means as far as what your opinions or what you're seeing in regard to insufficient human DNA detected and STR analysis competent?
Yes, so we do at the quantitation step, we do have a cutoff, a certain value where if we detect human DNA that's below this cutoff, we validated that it's not going to, most likely not going to provide a profile that can be used. So we halt testing at that step.
Now, sir, if I could direct your attention to the 5th report that you issued in this case, DNA testing report number 5. And does that sort of contain the totality of the items that you analyzed in this particular case?
It does.
Now, sir, if I could direct your attention to an item labeled as number 3-2.1.1. And what is the description for that particular item, sir?
That is a sample from exterior of broken drinking glass.
And with reference, were you able to generate a DNA profile from the swab or the sampling from that item?
Yes.
And what, if any, comparison were you able to do in regard to the DNA profile of Mr. O'Keefe?
Yes, so the sample was interpreted as a mixture of 3 contributors, and the DNA profile for this item is at least 530 non-alien times more likely if it originated from John O'Keefe and 2 unknown individuals than if it originated from 3 unknown unrelated individuals, and this provides support for an inclusion.
And so the sample from the exterior of the broken drinking glass is at least 530 non-alien times more likely if it originated from John O'Keefe, correct?
Correct.
Now, if I could turn your attention to item 7-1.2.1. And what is the description associated with that item?
That is a sample from stain A on upper right leg of jeans.
And were you able to generate a DNA profile from the sample from what's labeled as stain A on the upper right leg of Mr. O'Keefe's jeans?
I was.
And what, if any, comparison were you able to do with relation to that profile from that sample to Mr. O'Keefe's DNA profile?
Yes, so the DNA profile was interpreted as a mixture of 3 contributors, including male DNA. Contributor 1 was suitable for comparison, and due to limited information, contributors 2 and 3 were not suitable for comparisons. And the DNA profile from this item is at least 570 non-million times more likely if it originated from John O'Keefe and 2 unknown individuals than if it originated from 3 unknown individuals. And this provides support for an inclusion.
And so when you say, as far as due to limited information, contributors 2 and 3 are not suitable for comparison, what does that mean?
So that just means that those contributors were very low and that any comparisons that would be done to them could not be reliable based on our protocols and validations.
And so from your comparative analysis, you came to the opinion or conclusion that the sample from the upper right leg of Mr. O'Keefe's jeans was 570 non-million times more likely than it originated from Mr. O'Keefe, correct?
Could you rephrase that?
With respect to your comparative analysis of the profile from the sample from stain A on the upper right leg of Mr. O'Keefe's jeans, your opinion is that it was at least 570 non-million times more likely that it originated from John O'Keefe, correct?
From then,
Sorry.
What was your conclusion as it came to item 7-1.2.
so the DNA profile from this item is at least 570 non-million times more likely if it originated from John O'Keefe and 2 unknown individuals than if it originated from 3 unknown, unrelated individuals, and this provides support for an inclusion.
Sir, let me break from this for a second, and I just want to ask you a little bit about transfer DNA. You familiar with that term?
Yes.
And can you explain to the jury what you understand that term means?
So transfer DNA just means DNA that sort of transfers based on just some activity that can happen. Like if somebody touches a water bottle, they might transfer some DNA onto that water bottle.
Now, from the fact that DNA is on something or on an item and it matches the profile from an individual, is there anything from that that you can opine or conclude as to how that DNA was deposited or when?
No, I cannot.
Now, with reference to factors that may cause a degradation of a DNA sample or a touch DNA sample that's left, what, if any, are some of the factors?
What is
that may
Wally
affect that
doing?
towards,
Oh
causing
my
degradation,
God.
or you're causing an inability for you to be able to generate a DNA profile from an item?
Some factors include being exposed to heat for a prolonged time and ultraviolet rays from the sun, as well as just time. It might eventually lead to some degradation.
The defense will
Now,
just
as
go.
far as items that are outside, because you indicated that being hot or warm temperatures might have some effect on it. What, if any, impact will cold temperatures have?
So we store our DNA extracts in a cold room. So cold temperatures could be very good to help preserve any DNA that's on there.
Now, if I could turn your attention back to your report number 5 and ask you with reference to item 7-1.3.1. And can you, what is the description for that item, sir?
That is a sample from stain B on upper right leg of jeans.
And again, those would be the genes.
Oh my God, man.
Correct.
And you were able to generate a DNA profile from that sample as well?
Correct.
And what, if any, comparison were you able to do between the profile from that DNA on the upper right leg of Mr. O'Keefe's jeans and Mr. O'Keefe's DNA?
Yeah, so the DNA profile was interpreted as a mixture of 3 contributors, including male DNA. And the DNA profile from this item is at least 660 non-million times more likely if it originated from John O'Keefe and 2 unknown individuals than if it originated from 3 unknown, unrelated individuals. And this provides support for an inclusion.
Next, if I could turn your attention to item 7-1.4.1, and what is that sample, or what is that item or sample from?
That is a sample from stain C on upper right leg of jeans.
And those genes would be Mr. O'Keefe's genes as well?
Correct.
And were you able to then generate a DNA profile from that sample?
Yes.
And what, if any, comparison or what, if any, conclusions or opinions did you draw from a comparative analysis of the DNA profile from that sample from the upper right leg of Mr. O'Keefe's genes and Mr. O'Keefe's DNA profile?
So the DNA profile is a mixture of at least 2 contributors, including male DNA. Contributor 1 is suitable for comparison, and due to limited information, contributor 2 is not suitable for comparison. The DNA profile was interpreted as a mixture of 2 contributors, and the DNA profile of this item is at least 830 non-alien times more likely if it originated from John O'Keefe and an unknown individual than if it originated from 2 unknown, unrelated individuals, and this provides support for an inclusion.
Now, sir, if I could turn your attention to item 7-1.5.1, and where did that come from?
That is sample from stain D on upper right leg of genes.
And again, were you able to generate a DNA profile for that sample?
Yes.
And what, if anything, were your findings in relation to comparative analysis between that and that DNA profile from that sample and the DNA profile of Mr. O'Keefe?
The DNA profile was interpreted as a mixture of 3 contributors, including male DNA, and the DNA profile from this item is at least 670 non-alien times more likely if it originated from John O'Keefe and 2 unknown individuals than if it originated from 3 unknown, unrelated individuals, and this provides support for an inclusion.
Sir, if I could turn your attention to item 7-1.6.1. And what is the description for that item?
That is sample from stain E on upper right leg of genes.
And were you able to also generate a DNA profile from that sample?
Yes.
And did you then conduct a comparative analysis between the DNA profile from that sample and the DNA profile from Mr. O'Keefe?
Yes.
And what, if any, conclusions or opinions or findings did you have in regard to that comparative analysis?
Yeah, so the DNA profile was interpreted as a mixture of 2 contributors, including male DNA. Contributor 1 is suitable for comparison, and due to limited information, contributor 2 is not suitable for comparison. The DNA profile from this item is at least 1 decillion times more likely if it originated from John O'Keefe and an unknown individual than if it originated from 2 unknown, unrelated individuals, and this provides support for an inclusion.
Now, as far as that decillion, again, similar to the non-alien, how many zeros are we talking about?
That's a 1 followed by 33 zeros.
Now, if I could turn your attention to item 7-1.7.1. You familiar with that item, sir?
Yes.
And what is the description for that item?
That is sample from unstained areas of exterior of genes.
And were you able to generate a DNA profile from that sample?
Yes.
And similarly, were you able to then do a comparative analysis between the DNA profile from that sample and the DNA profile of Mr. O'Keefe?
Yes.
And what, if anything, were your findings in regard to that comparative analysis?
Yeah, the DNA profile was interpreted as a mixture of 4 contributors, including male DNA. The DNA profile from this item is at least 553 septillion times more likely if it originated from John O'Keefe and 3 unknown individuals than if it originated from 4 unknown, unrelated individuals. This provides support for an inclusion.
And similarly, sir, with regard to that number, septillion, how many zeros is that?
That is a 1 followed by 24 zeros.
I'm going to ask some questions about a number of different items from 7-17. These are samples taken from an orange t-shirt as well as a gray long sleeve shirt. Is that correct?
Correct.
And if you could, essentially you did testing on those items as well as some fingernail clippings belonging to Mr. O'Keefe?
Correct.
Or samples from the fingernail clippings?
Yes.
Now, with regard to those items, swabbings taken from the stains from various areas of the orange t-shirt, and just in general, where were those areas on the t-shirt, the orange t-shirt to start with, that the swabbings were taken from?
The top front left of orange shirt and front bottom right of the shirt as well, and just the back left shoulder of the orange shirt.
Now, with regard to the gray long sleeve shirt, where are the areas on the shirt where those swabbings were taken from?
The right sleeve, the center front, the back left, the back right, and the back bottom of right.
And were you able to generate DNA profiles from each of those items?
I was.
And were you then able to do a comparative analysis between the DNA profile from each of those items with relation to the DNA profile from Mr. O'Keefe?
I was.
And what, if any, conclusions were you able to draw from that comparative analysis?
So the male DNA profile was interpreted as originating from a single contributor, and the DNA profile from these items is at least 490 octillion times more likely if it originated from John O'Keefe than if it originated from an unknown, unrelated individual. This provides support for an inclusion.
As far as that number is concerned, octillion, how many zeros is in an octillion?
That's a 1 followed by 27 zeros.
And with regard to each of those items, from the orange T-shirt, the gray long sleeve T-shirt, and the fingernail clippings, so they were taken from both the right and left hands of Mr. O'Keefe, is that correct?
Correct.
So that's 490 followed by 27 zeros. That would be from a single contributor, correct?
Correct.
Now, sir, if I could turn your attention to item 7-18, I'm sorry, 7-18.4.1. You're familiar with that item?
Yes.
And what is the description associated with that item?
Sample from stain C on top front gray long sleeve shirt.
And were you able to generate a DNA profile with respect to that?
Yes.
And were you able to then do a comparative analysis between that DNA profile from that item and the DNA profile of Mr. O'Keefe?
Yes, I was.
And what, if any, conclusions did you come to with regard to that?
The male DNA profile was interpreted as originating from a single contributor. The DNA profile from this item is at least 58 octillion times more likely if it originated from John O'Keefe than if it originated from an unknown, unrelated individual. This provides support for an inclusion.
And with regard to that stain from the gray long sleeve T-shirt, again, that was determined by you through your testing to be DNA from a single contributor matched to John O'Keefe, correct?
It was determined to be from a single contributor, yes.
Now, sir, if I could turn your attention to item 7-18.14.1. Are you familiar with that item?
Yes.
And what is the description associated with that item, sir?
A sample from stain L on back bottom right of gray long sleeve shirt.
And were you able to generate a DNA profile from that, sample from that item as well?
Yes, I was.
And were you able to then do a comparative analysis between the sample profile from that sample versus the profile from Mr. O'Keefe?
Yes, I was.
And what, if anything, were your findings in relation to that?
So the DNA profile was interpreted as a mixture of two contributors, including male DNA. The DNA profile from this item is at least 1 decillion times more likely if it originated from John O'Keefe and an unknown individual than if it originated from two unknown, unrelated individuals. This provides support for an inclusion.
And sir, I'm going to ask you, or draw your attention to item 7-18.17.1. Familiar with that item?
Yes.
And what is the description associated with the sample from that item?
Sample from unstained areas of exterior of gray long sleeve shirt.
And were you able to also generate a DNA profile from that sample?
Yes.
And what, if any, were you able to then do a comparative analysis between the sample profile from that sample and the profile from Mr. O'Keefe?
I was.
And what, if any, conclusions did you come to with reference to that comparative analysis?
The DNA profile was interpreted as a mixture of two contributors, including male DNA. Contributor 1 is suitable for comparison, and due to limited information, contributor 2 is not suitable for comparison. The DNA profile from this item is at least 960 non-million times more likely if it originated from John O'Keefe and an unknown individual than if it originated from two unknown, unrelated individuals. This provides support for an inclusion.
Sir, there are some other items from which you conducted testing but were not able to generate a profile from, correct?
Correct.
And specifically, I'm going to ask about item 7-3.1. That's a sample from the right instep of Mr. O'Keefe's sneaker, is that correct?
Could you repeat that number again, please?
Sir, if I could direct your attention within your DNA report number 5, I'm talking about item number 9.
Right. Yep.
And so, sir, with reference to that, what, if any, there's an indication as far as the mixture not being suitable for comparison due to the quality of the profile, correct?
Correct. It was a mixture of at least 5 contributors.
And so from that, as far as not suitable for comparison, can you explain to the jury what that means?
Yeah, so during our validations, we've only validated mixtures up to 4 contributors because we've determined that once you get more than 4, like at least 5 contributors into a mixture, it becomes too complex to be able to make any reliable comparisons to that mixture.
Sir, if I could direct you to item number 11 or item number 7-18.3.1 within your report.
All right, yep,
And that's a stain from the gray long sleeve t-shirt top front, is that correct?
yes,
Now that is indicated as not suitable for comparison due to the quality of the profile, correct?
correct.
And can you explain to the jury what that means as far as not being suitable due to the quality of the profile?
Yes, so during our, bringing it back to our 3rd step of amplification, where we're making millions of copies of specific locations, sometimes there might not be a lot of DNA there, and that amplification step might not amplify all the information that could be present, and the profile that's generated won't have all the information to be able to reliably make a comparison. So the information that we are able to look at is very limited, so we just do not do any comparisons because they would not be reliable.
And with that same as far as not suitable for comparison due to the quality of the profile, was that the same for 2 other areas that you tested in regard to the front or sample from the front of the gray long sleeve shirt and a sample from the back left sleeve of the gray long sleeve shirt?
Yes.
May I have a moment?
Yes.
Sir, let me ask you just briefly, you're familiar with the term called SDR mix?
Yes.
And can you explain to the jury what that is and how that involved or how it's implicated within your test?
Yeah, so StarMix is a tool that we use to basically break down complex mixtures into its individual contributors and into like a way that it would best describe that mixture. And once it does that, it'll then do comparisons and calculate a likelihood ratio, which is a statistical weight to that comparison.
And how does that relate to the testing that you did in this case?
I used StarMix on all the samples that had comparisons done to them.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, sir. I have no further questions, Your Honor.
Ms. Little? No questions, thank you. All right, Mr. Porto, you are all set.
No questions again. I love it.
Could I see counsel regarding scheduling, please?
Yes, sir.
Can I see counsel? Why are they doing that right now? When the jury is in there. What, Bev? You're taking up court time to schedule? Let's get another witness in there. This woman makes no sense to me. Brutal. We don't need to be looking at Paul's junk all the time. Come on. I'm tired of looking at his junk. Not interested. It's better than his wife's junk, I guess.
Quiet, please.
So we're
Quiet,
actually
please.
going to send you home today because we're on schedule. It's beautiful out. Rather than start with the witness that we'll start with tomorrow morning, it makes sense. I'm going to talk to the lawyers for a few minutes. So we'll send you home. Do not discuss this case with anyone. And just so that I'm clear, that means each other. That means any aspect of this case, any observations, anything at all. Do not do any independent research or investigation into this case. If you happen to see, hear, or
I'm the same,
anything
Dandy.
about this case, please disregard it. We expect a full day tomorrow, so we'll see you tomorrow.
All rise for the court, please.
Good Lord.
Follow me, please.
Oh. This is the first I've heard of that.
So I'm just going to ask, I'm going to talk about that now.
I'm going to talk about that now. Okay. Gotcha.
Thank you. Please be seated. Court
I
remains in
didn't
session.
know.
All right, so I'll see counsel at sidebar about a couple of issues.
And once again, we're leaving early because on schedule, I guess. No more witnesses is probably what it is. On Emily's stream. Gotcha. Gotcha. Well, that's that for today. So I know. It's like really, really, Bev, but I haven't understood how she has run this case from the very beginning. I mean, nothing she has done in this trial has been normal, what we see in other courts. Oh, Lordy. So, guys, I guess that's it. I'll set up another stream for tomorrow and see if we pile through these people. Yeah, we'll go chit-chat over there. We're going to chit-chat in Discord for a little bit. All right, guys. So I appreciate you guys hanging out with me. We had a lot going on today with John Ray, that live stream, and then we broke this into two because that Rex update with John Ray interrupted the stream. But with that said, I've got some things to go look at now. And again, I appreciate you guys. Thanks very much for hanging out with me, and I'll see you guys in the next one. Bye.